The women's hands were clasped in a pleading gesture, as if someone was praying to all the gods at once. A girl with purple hair and eyes of the same color was kneeling. Large tears froze in her huge eyes. Rudis didn't understand what was happening. She was called to the throne room in the middle of the night. Her father was sitting on the throne. His wife, as always, was at his right hand. Barthold Amaryllis was famous for his tough and unprincipled character. It was almost impossible to move him to pity. The high priest, who occupied his place at the emperor's throne, tried to say something. But the master cut short this attempt with a menacing roar. Father's voice echoed throughout the hall. He was saying that peace would only come to the Vishyo Empire in one case, if the right sacrifice was made. The emperor did not want to live in darkness any longer. He wanted to enjoy every day. His finger pointed towards the girl. Rudis Amaryllis was the second princess of the Vishyo Empire, and it was to her that the gentleman was now pointing. It was this unfortunate woman who was chosen to be the offering to the ancient deities. After all, at that very moment, dozens of people were dying from a terrible misfortune. Now, only the capital and a few surrounding areas were safe. The rest of the regions fell victim to the terrible invasion. The girl with the dragonfly hair clip in her purple hair knew it, but she couldn't believe what was happening. After all, she didn't want to give up her life, but her father said that everything had already been decided, and there was no way back, and the daughter should be proud that she will sacrifice herself to save her home. She will become a saint to atone for the sins of the empire. The gentleman continued, "In order to summon a deity with unprecedented power, one must sacrifice someone from the royal family. The princess must have known this." The emperor's neatly trimmed beard trembled, and his lips were tightly pressed together. Rudis couldn't hold back her tears. This ritual was really important for the people. The girl understood it well, but Selena could become such a victim. Princess Selena Amaryllis was a beautiful blonde with bright blue eyes, with a rose in her light curls. She herself was like a rosebud. It was impossible to sacrifice Selena instead of Rudis, and the master did not return to this question. Everything was finally decided. The high priest said that only a member of the royal family could be the offering, but Selene had purer blood. The Lord ignored these words. Rudis was still kneeling. She had been useless all her life. Now she was the only one who could help everyone. The emperor did not lie. The girl was born from a commoner, and now a good opportunity arose to get rid of such a disgrace. The poor girl sat on the floor of the throne room. Her own father avoided her. She was a child no one needed. An annoying misunderstanding. The princess folded her hands again, as if in prayer, or a silent plea to all the gods that exist in the world. The emperor said through clenched teeth that this ungrateful woman should be glad that she would be of at least some use to the empire. The high priest turned to the emperor again, asking if he was sure that the deity he had summoned would hear their prayers. Rudis was silently sobbing and bowing low, begging for mercy. Blood appeared on her forehead from the blows on the marble floor. The gentleman sitting on the throne made a gesture with his index finger, pointing at this pathetic bastard. Two knights grabbed the unfortunate woman by the arms and dragged her away. The girl alternately screamed her father's name and begged Selena to save her. Tears and blood dripped onto the exquisite marble floor of the throne room. The fair-haired lady watched this scene from a distance, almost indifferently, but a cruel smile played on her lips. The gentleman in the strict uniform watched the knights leading away the resisting girl, and slowly nodded his head. A few minutes later, the young victim was thrown onto the cobblestones. The unfortunate girl did not understand why her father had been so cruel to her. In the main temple, a sacred ritual was being held. The high priest was calling upon an ancient deity from the depths of eternity. Those who needed his power were calling upon the mighty one. The purple-haired victim sat on the floor in the center of a pentacle drawn in blood. The priest chanted for the one who would fight them and save the land drenched in blood. In return, they offered a child of the most noble family of all, one who could unite the many families of the lands of Vishyo. The girl in the circle was writhing in pain. Her scream was almost inhuman. Her body was burning from the inside, as if hot lava was flowing through her veins. Her eardrums were bursting. Suddenly, the pain subsided. The girl sat on the floor and did not understand what had happened. Stone gates opened before her eyes. Only one thought kept repeating in her head. She didn't want to die, to disappear like that. The hand stretched forward seemed to be preventing something terrible from approaching. A dark shadow that was inevitably approaching. But it was getting closer. Suddenly, a dragonfly-shaped hairpin appeared in her hand, with a blade-like tip, like a small dagger that brought death. In desperation, the girl threw her hand with the dagger forward and pierced the dark creature. Blood oozed from the wound, flowing down the thin wrist with the dagger. Rudis rose from the ground. Tears of fear and despair flowed from her eyes, like mountain waterfalls. She did not understand what kind of dark creature had just tried to kill her. Suddenly, two huge yellow eyes appeared before the desperate girl. The narrow pupils resembled those of a snake, or maybe a dragon. Her whole body ached unbearably. Perhaps this was the end of her life's journey. She prayed for help, for someone to come and save the unfortunate woman. Even if her sacrifice was not in vain, even if she saved someone, the young princess just wanted to live. As if in a dream, someone's hand touched her, supported her by the waist, and someone strong helped her to stand and not fall into the abyss of oblivion. A young man with the same purple hair touched her forehead with his lips. But it seemed that it was not reality, but a nightmare that comes to its victim on dark nights. The princess begged for mercy. Again and again she called on her father not to act so cruelly, and she asked him to save her daughter. But the cruel phrases hit like a whip, that she was the daughter of a commoner, an unloved bastard, a wretched thing, unworthy of happiness. These terrible words were absolutely true. The girl's life turned into a living hell, in which the girl lived for 20 years. A child born with any kind of abnormality into the royal family was doomed to be an outcast, like a pathetic piece of trash that no one would give alms to. Because of a leg crippled since infancy, the girl withdrew into herself as a child and led a quiet and modest life, just begging God to grant her at least a drop of love. But her own father signed his daughter's death warrant. The end of the victim is the same in all times, to die in terrible agony. Her fate is to be torn to pieces and eaten by a terrible beast. Princess Rudis asked herself again and again, what was her fault? What did the girl do wrong in life? One day, a thought crept into her head. What if she was not carrying her own cross? It could be the father's sin, for which the daughter was destined to pay. Is it possible that it was not the girl's fault? That of the emperor's 2 daughters, one was unloved. It was so unfair. Tears of despair filled the huge eyes again. All the troubles of the noble family fell only on this unfortunate one. It was now that the memory of that spring came to mind. That was when the little girl ran away from her bedroom for the first time. It was this vision that flashed before her death. If only she could escape the terrible clutches of death alive, the princess would never commit any more rash acts. I wouldn't sacrifice my life pursuing an impossible dream. I would only care about myself, and I would live freely. Suddenly, the singing of birds interrupted these bitter thoughts. A light breeze swayed the curtains in the room. The girl opened her eyes. She was lying on a soft bed. It was a beautiful, sunny day outside. The princess did not understand what had happened to her. Perhaps it was just a bad dream. Suddenly, as if in reality, I felt a fire that consumed my entire body. The pain spread throughout my stomach. The air was so hot that I couldn't take even one breath. These feelings couldn't be a dream. They echoed so clearly in every cell. Rudis wondered what had happened. I clearly remembered that her father had given his daughter to certain death, and how they were going to sacrifice the unfortunate girl. And then there was only her own cry, about not wanting to die, and a fervent plea to all the gods for help, and that dragonfly-shaped dagger pin, stuck in dark flesh, and the victim's blood flowing down the thin wrist. The girl touched her head with her hand, as if checking if everything was okay. The slight pain was still present. She raised herself up on her elbow, and, as if in the distance, she heard voices behind her. There were many of them, and they were all talking at once. They wondered if she had slept well and if the princess needed anything, perhaps a glass of water, and they wondered what would happen to Selena now. Rudy suddenly realized that she was still alive. It was unclear how this was possible. It seemed that the sacrifice ceremony had failed. Besides, this room was so warm, beautiful, and sunny, like in the palace of a real princess. Suddenly, the girl realized that she was in her sister's room. Before, she could only dream of visiting her, even for a minute. Even Selena's maids were from noble families, and none of them treated Rudy's with the respect she deserved. The girl tried to say something, but couldn't utter a word. Her throat was dry, and only wheezing came out. The servants immediately began to bustle about. Someone brought a glass of water and raised it to her mouth. Others carefully held her head while she drank. The maids caught every gesture of the princess. They anticipated every desire. Something incredible was happening. Rudy's knew that all these girls were Selena's servants, but they hated her wretched sister all their lives, even despised her. One of the girls stood out from the rest. She stood out in a strict blue dress with a bow. She was interested in the well-being of Her Highness and reported that the Emperor would arrive soon. Lady Ivana never addressed Rudy's by her title. She called her a wretched thing, not worthy of being a princess, especially not the sister of the magnificent Selena. Once the princess was even locked in the attic, where she had to eat spoiled bread. She was sometimes treated worse than slaves. All this was because of dirty blood. The young lady, Countess Cluden, asked if the princess still felt pain. After all, she could call the high priest. Before, all these ladies ignored Rudy's. Suddenly, a fear flashed through her mind. Maybe the girls were plotting something against her. The lady sat on the luxurious bed. She only tried to formulate some phrase, as the servants immediately began to move. They caught every letter, every glance. Everything that was happening resembled a theater of the absurd. The princess asked everyone to leave. Let every single one of them leave the room. Loudly and insistently, the girl repeated, "Let the ladies go away." And suddenly she cringed, afraid that she would be hit. After all, she had certainly hurt someone's pride. Lady Ivana was still standing by the bed. There was a shadow of a smile on her lips. She had hated Rudy's all her life. Now she bowed slightly. The maid was very sorry that she had previously committed several impermissible liberties with Her Highness. At the same time, she smiled insincerely. Rudy's was shocked by what she heard. Now this snake is simply expressing regret for all the evil that it did. The princess did not understand what Lady Ivana was trying to achieve, but she only sighed angrily that Her Highness had always envied Lady Selena. This was true, but the girl did not at all strive for luxury and the countless number of servants that her sister had. She wanted to have the love that was given to Selena, even for a short time. After all, she was the same princess. But now, Rudy's knew that her family had never really cared about her. Now she didn't want this fake love anymore. The princess no longer wanted to see them. Her father, Selena, and everyone who was with them. All her life, she wagged her tail like an abandoned puppy. She was looking for a little love and affection. But all she got was beatings. Rudy's inherited the blood of the emperor, who defeated and dethroned his father, and was able to rise to the top. But she had no right to be among the elite, especially to be near her father. A pathetic, unloved princess. Lady Ivana smiled, but her angry face showed all the complaints she had against the princess, that she had envied Selena all her life, and could only look at her. This black envy was clearly visible to everyone. However, as was the absurd dream of changing places with the beautiful Selena. All the maids laughed at the crazy woman behind her back. Rudy's repeated her request in a firm voice. Addressing Lady Ivana directly, she ordered her to leave the room. The maid lifted her skirts and approached the bed. She muttered that the princess had just woken up and seemed to be still in her senses, and she would greatly regret throwing her out. Just yesterday, Rudy's would have been very scared by such speeches, but now these bold words were empty space. Compared to that nightmare, the princess did not change her mind. Lady Ivana's presence was tiring her. Therefore, she insisted that she leave the bedroom. Otherwise, the princess will leave this room herself, if only because it belongs to her sister Selena. As soon as the girl said these words, the servants became agitated. They begged her not to leave. After all, they would all be severely punished in that case. Rudy's was very surprised. She did not understand who could punish the servants just because the princess crossed the threshold of this bedroom. The only person who could do this was my father. He must have had something up his sleeve. Suddenly, Excited voices were heard from behind the door. The guards were not letting the visitor in. By order of the emperor, no one could enter this room. Someone tried to open the door, but the guards strictly followed the order of the head of the empire. They insisted that this could not be done. But eventually, the door swung open, and an enraged Princess Selena flew into the room. As always, she looked perfect, but she was furious. Pointing at her sister in her bed, she screamed, wanted to know why this freak had taken over her room. She was surprised that she couldn't get into her bedroom. And all because of the scoundrel who imagined herself a real princess. Selena screamed that she would figure it out herself. She ran up to her sister and grabbed her by the lace collar of her nightgown, tried to pull her out of bed, ordered her to get out. After all, this is not the princess's room. An imposter. I wondered what my father was thinking about then. Rudis was surprised to notice that she was no longer afraid. Before, the girl would have resigned herself to her fate, but now her body felt so light. Selena was taken aback. This girl dared to ignore her. It just couldn't be. Always so inconspicuous, now she showed her teeth. The enraged favorite of her father raised her hand, intending to hit her sister. Out of habit, she lowered her head, expecting a beating. But suddenly, someone grabbed her hand, not allowing her to strike. Esther's maid stood up for Princess Rudis. Selena wondered how Esther could do such a thing. Go against her mistress. It was all very strange. It was necessary to sort it all out immediately. The sacrificial ceremony took place 3 days ago. The emperor was apparently not pleased. The high priest was also worried. Selena even suggested that her father spend time together drinking tea. But he was very tense and kept silent the whole time. The princess also tried to discuss the matter with Prince Arcas, but he refused to meet. But the worst thing was that Rudis would return to the palace as soon as the treatment was over. The thought was simply unbearable. Suddenly, a thought flashed through the pretty blonde's head, that perhaps this was some kind of prank. A ridiculous joke. The girl wanted to ask her father directly, but he was thoughtful and did not even listen to his daughter. Selena decided to ask Esther herself, but she only reminded her that the princesses were connected by family ties, and warned against rash actions, so that something irreparable for everyone around would not happen. The princess did not believe what she heard. Selena was furious that this servant dared to talk to her like that. After all, before she had not dared to open her mouth. Both betrayal and rage were familiar to Rudis. The unloved girl often faced such feelings, but Selena wasn't used to this. She didn't even scream. She squealed that she would tell Daddy everything, and all the scoundrels would pay for everything. The maids didn't know what to do. His Majesty's orders were above all else, not just the emperor's, but also the high priest's. Besides, the whole situation was a secret to Rudis. Suddenly, the guards shouted for the way to be cleared. His Imperial Majesty had arrived. Everyone instantly turned their heads towards the doors. Father entered the bedroom with a precise, measured step. He looked very stern. As always, though, he walked across the room straight to the bed, where his daughter Rudis was still sitting. Without paying attention to anyone, he addressed her by name. However, Selena was not used to being ignored like that, and she began to complain with tears that Princess Ivana was talking complete nonsense, that the princess's room was given to Rudis. She asked her father to rein in the impudent girl. Let them throw the impostor out of the real princess's chambers. The emperor calmed his daughter with just one look and called on her to behave decently. The father said that he did not want to listen to his daughter's hysterics, and in a rough voice, he ordered her to shut her mouth. And finally, learn the rules of decency. The beloved princess was shocked. Her father had never raised his voice to her. Especially, he had never said such words. And the most offensive thing was that it was in front of strangers. He covered his face with his hands and apologized. He said that now was a very difficult time. The daughter remained silent, but it was the first and last time. The emperor looked up at Rudis. She was tense and didn't know how to act. The maid stood there bowing slightly the whole time. The father asked if his daughter Rudis had slept well. There were faint hints of concern in his tone, and the unloved girl had only her constant characteristics in her head: pathetic, worthless, and despised by everyone. All this was visible in the eyes of her father, who hated her. He believed that the girl could only drag out her miserable existence. Her whole life consisted of this, but now the girl had cast aside all hope, as if that incinerating fire inside her had burned away all the past. The emperor ordered the princess to get up from her bed and follow him. However, the girl did not move. He got furious. It seemed the girl had gone deaf. He grabbed her by the shoulder with his hand. He shouted the order again. Rudis raised her purple eyes and looked straight into her father's face. She had not dared to do this before. The emperor pulled his hand back. For some reason, this look made him feel cold and scared, as if someone had touched his heart with cold fingers. There was a bottomless, icy ocean in the purple eyes. This frost seemed to come from an abandoned temple. The gentleman was angry with himself. He cursed himself for even thinking about such a thing. In front of him was the same mudblood, a pathetic and worthless cripple. The father barked at the girl again, to get out of bed and follow where he ordered. The girl looked boldly into His Majesty's eyes, and in a firm voice asked why she should do this. No one expected this from her, not even Rudis herself. The air in the bedroom seemed to freeze. Everyone was afraid to even breathe. This impudent woman dared to contradict the order of the emperor himself. She had just refused to follow his order. But the girl looked him in the eyes and did not shy away, as she always did. She only asked, clearly pronouncing each word, why she should go with her father. It seemed that he wanted to sacrifice the princess again. Fury consumed the emperor, his face distorted. No one dared to speak like that to a superior. His hand was already raised to strike, but the girl only said that her father could no longer harm her. And although tears were rolling from her eyes, her gaze was as hard as steel. The emperor, helpless, lowered his hand, raised to strike. Rudis noted that he was pathetic at that moment. The girl had something to say, something to warn about. Having renounced the throne, Princess Ivana has chosen an alternative path to her rise in society. Many of those present here are eager to show off. Therefore, the emperor is forced to think through every step so as not to become a reason for gossip. Rudis was surprised at herself. It took her 20 years to understand his rotten nature. The girl got up from the bed. Although she didn't want to follow the order, the princess needed to understand something. Why had everyone's attitude towards her changed so much? But as soon as I stepped on my left leg, a sharp pain pierced it. The leg was dark, and it was precisely because of this crippled leg that it was difficult to walk. The maid rushed to the princess, offering to help, but the girl refused. She was used to always managing on her own. The emperor was already leaving the room, ordered his daughter to follow him on the go and not waste time in vain. The girl heard her sister's hysterical cries as she walked. She was arguing with the maids. But Rudis ordered herself not to be distracted, but to concentrate on walking. The father led the girl into the study. The interior of the room was striking in its luxury. As soon as he opened the massive doors, the gentleman froze. The high priest Bennett was sitting on the sofa. He rose abruptly from his seat at the sight of those who entered, and hurried to meet them. But he did not stop near the emperor and his guards. Instead, he went straight to the girl. He folded his hands in front of him and sincerely greeted Her Highness Princess Rudis, who smiled slightly in response. During the ceremony, this man was the only one who looked at the victim with pity, and it seemed that he was the only one who was happy that the princess was alive. Bennett bustled about. He led the girl to a chair. After all, she was still very weak, and the body quickly got tired if you stood for a long time. The emperor ordered the guards to leave the office. The conversation promised to be private, more like secret. The emperor leaned forward and asked the high priest forcefully if this was really the one he needed. The minister of faith confirmed this. After all, he had not the slightest doubt about it. Rudis did not understand at all what the men were talking about. The father asked if he really believed that this was an ancient god. It simply couldn't be. After all, the summoned gods descended into this world only after they had drunk all the blood of the victim. But Rudis was alive. The high priest confirmed that he too had doubts at first. But the sacrifice ceremony was a success, and this is the one everyone was waiting for. The gentleman started shouting. He insisted that the summoned one was not following the emperor's orders. He was not listening to him. But the minister of faith retorted that the ancient god could only listen to the wishes of the summoner, but not necessarily fulfill them. After all, there was a big difference between a request and an order. Besides, the gods still showed benevolence towards Princess Rudis, even though she was his victim. This could help in the matter. Suddenly, His Majesty interrupted his interlocutor in mid-sentence, and he ordered the high priest to be silent. The girl must not know anything. She had already allowed herself too much. Rudy still didn't understand anything, but she had learned to be silent throughout her life. However, she analyzed everything she heard. It was all very strange. Suddenly, the emperor suggested performing the ceremony again, to summon a deity who was easier to manipulate. These were the words of a true tyrant. Rudy spoke up. She was not going to be a victim anymore. And she said it firmly. The emperor choked with rage. He only had to wish for this girl to be flogged half to death, and then thrown into a stone crypt to die. Only thanks to her father was this ungrateful girl alive at all. No one would have bothered with her. They would have strangled her right after birth. Rudy's had lived in the bonds of fear before. But now everything was different. There was nothing holding her back anymore. Looking up, she said that Selena was more suited to the role of a victim. At the same moment, she received a blow to the face. The emperor was not going to hold back. This ungrateful woman answered her father so brazenly. She wanted to sacrifice someone from the pure-blooded royal family, and she was shaking for her worthless life. Rudis raised her purple eyes. She asked what she should be grateful for. After all, she had known only eternal mockery in life. The emperor growled and hit the unfortunate woman again. Blood flowed from her mouth. Red drops flowed onto the carpet. Selena was his true daughter, not this bastard. The blows rained down again and again. The high priest was afraid for the girl. After all, the master could kill her. But he shouted that he had to go through humiliation so that the nobles would recognize this wretched bastard as a princess, a cripple born from a commoner. He asked why this ungrateful woman ignores orders, does not carry them out, and resists the will of her master. The girl herself was surprised that only now she rebelled. She had been too naive before, and she wanted to get at least a piece of love from her father. The emperor stopped mid-sentence when Rudis looked at him. Her eyes. Something had clearly changed in them since the ceremony. However, no one could resist the Lord. Not the young high priest, Duke Ivana, who refused to participate in the ceremony. He was eager to seize the throne, not Rudy's mother, not herself. There is no such person who would not follow the path prepared by the emperor, and such an insignificant girl was no exception. The powerful hand grabbed the purple hair. Suddenly, the door to the office opened. A young man stood on the threshold. He was cold as metal and calm as the moon. The person who entered quietly asked what noise he heard. After all, the man asked to bring the girl, and then wake him up. The high priest jumped up from his seat, and the emperor let go of his daughter's hair. Both stood frozen in stupor. The man with yellow eyes and vertical pupils came closer. Both men bowed and greeted the ancient great deity. The girl sitting on the floor was perplexed. It turns out there was a person with whom the father could be so polite. I wondered who he really was. An ordinary-looking young man. But his eyes were captivating and attractive. The dark-haired guy came closer and looked at Princess Rudis, sitting on the floor with a bloody face. The man approached and asked the high priest if this was the girl he had sent for. He bowed and answered in the affirmative. The princess suddenly felt an inexplicable warmth that spread throughout her body. Slightly stumbling, she asked the man who he was. He brought his face closer. His hair fell on his forehead, and his eyes were only slightly visible through it. The visitor noted that Rudis must know him, but she had no idea about it, no matter how hard she tried to fish something out of the depths of her memory. Then the man said his name, Levane. As expected, the girl did not know this man. The yellow eyes from under her bangs lingered briefly on the embarrassed, tear-stained face. She had never really seen this guy, but that look. The stranger looked somehow special, as if he was reaching into the very depths of consciousness. The man tried to direct the girl's memory in the right direction. But then he said that he was the one who was imprisoned in the crypt. Rudis felt like she had been electrocuted. Yes, she had seen something in that searing darkness, but she didn't believe that this guy was the monster. The princess clearly remembered the huge yellow eyes. It turns out that he was the very deity that was summoned with the help of the sacrifice. They existed in the pitch darkness before all living things appeared. At first, they were called gods, but they were not. These were demons with inhuman strength. All they needed from humans was flesh and blood. And it turned out that this was the ancient deity in the dark crypt. But demons must take the form of terrible monsters. And this young man was very handsome and courageous. Levane pulled back slightly, asked the girl to trust him, and to tell him if something didn't suit her. The demon touched the princess's cheek with his palm, and slightly moved the hair. Traces of beatings and bloody streaks were visible on her face. He extended his hand, helping her to get into a more comfortable position, and sympathetically sympathized with the girl for what they did to her. The memory of the monster in the stone crypt was still very fresh, and she almost resigned herself. But the creature that the victim feared so much was kind to her. But the demon reassured her that he would not hurt the princess, and asked her not to worry. He could even deal with those who had caused so much harm to the sufferer. After all, she was very scared, and she didn't quite trust the stranger, but he wanted to prove that he wasn't dangerous. After all, the girl was the reason the demon came into this world, the beautiful young maiden who saved him. And again, he touched the beauty's face with his hand. His eyes attracted her like a magnet, and in her eyes a sea of purple splashed. Again, that all-pervading heat spread through the body, but it did not burn out all that existed, as it had done that time. Instead, it filled every cell with warmth. All this was from the demon's hot hand. The emperor and the high priest stood there in a slight bow, and they could not believe what was happening, that the monster had not swallowed the victim, but was showing sympathy towards her. Levane still had his hand on the girl's cheek, and he hadn't hurt her. That was his proof. Rudy's came to her senses a little. It turned out that it really was that demon. Its existence was connected to that magic circle and the sacrifice. If the princess disappears, he will disappear too, and the dark demon will be forced to return back to the world of chaos. And the girl was his savior. Chaos was the world that creatures wanted to leave, even if it meant fulfilling someone else's will. It turned out that the demon was happy to escape from there, just like Rudy's herself ran away from her past. The girl wasn't sure yet that she could fully trust the stranger, but his hand and the warmth coming from her gave hope for the best. With the help of the young man, the princess stood up and accidentally stepped on her sore foot. A sharp pain pierced her foot, or rather, spread throughout her entire body. But suddenly it passed, as if it had never happened. It was incredible. After all, the girl had lived with this pain all her life. Suddenly, the emperor spoke up. He noticed that he had brought the one the demon had asked for, and now he was demanding to get his own. After all, even an ancient deity had to understand that he received a body only thanks to a call, and fulfill his obligations. His Majesty bowed slightly. A powerful grin was frozen on his face. He asked Mr. Levane to fulfill the emperor's request. Rudy's remembered her father's words after the sacrifice. He had shouted that the summoned one had no intention of obeying and following the emperor's orders. If the ancient deity did not obey orders, it meant it wanted to meet its victim. It turned out that as long as Rudy's was here, nothing could harm the demon. Levane raised his yellow eyes and looked at the emperor. His gaze did not bode well. So, the master wanted the demon to fulfill the request. Well, he agreed. But first, the emperor must hand over his powers, and then the new emperor will have to listen to the request of the subordinate. His Majesty thought he had misheard. He asked to clarify what Mr. Levane had just said. Rudy's was confused. She didn't understand why the sacrifice didn't work as intended. Then the demon spoke. Thousands of years had passed since humans began using rituals, but none of them had ever understood how they worked. After all, nowhere did it say that after the summoning, the demon becomes the property of the summoner. The emperor was furious. The monster had asked for a sacrifice, and it had been given to him. If it had not been for the will of the deity, this filthy bastard would have been dead in infancy. She had been saved for sacrifice. Even now, the father pretended to love and care for his daughter, but it was only to gain the grace of the ancient god. Rudy's knew that she was used, that she was like trash to her family, but it hurt so much inside. The emperor continued, The ancient manuscripts said that the ancient deity must submit to the will of the summoner. In exchange, receive its sacrifice. And the emperor was the one who summoned the demon and gave him his daughter of royal blood as a gift. So the deity must obey him personally and strictly follow his orders. Levaine's face darkened. His eyes flashed yellow. The emperor seemed struck by lightning. His angry speech choked in mid-sentence. The demon hadn't seen people like this for a long time. He imagined himself a god with unlimited power. In reality, he was a simple mortal with a dark soul. Suddenly, the gentleman grabbed his head. It was as if a red-hot iron had bitten into his brain. An inhuman scream escaped from his lips, the same ones that had recently ordered him to obey. The emperor collapsed to the floor as if he had been mown down. Only hoarse groans came from his mouth. The high priest rushed to his master. Levain looked down at the fallen emperor and growled at the worthless wretch not to dare give orders to the demon. Rudis was astonished. Her formidable father was kneeling at the feet of the young man. The all-powerful emperor had surrendered so quickly. The high priest approached and bowed low to the ancient deity. The demon gave him permission to speak. The minister of faith expressed respect for Mr. Levain. He was not so impudent as to disobey orders. However, he reminded me of the agreement. According to it, the ancient deity was called upon for immediate assistance. According to the terms of the summoning contract, the ancient deity was obligated to help the people. Thousands of people were dying in the kingdom, and they really needed help. Bennett bowed even deeper. He had not initiated the sacrifice of Princess Rudis, but he had performed the ritual of sacrifice in the hope of salvation. The ancient manuscripts said that the ritual was supposed to be beneficial to both parties, although this issue had not yet been fully studied. And again, the high priest prayed for help. Levain winced. His answer was the same. He was not going to help these cruel people, or fulfill their every whim. The princess thought about the demon's words. He did not want to do a favor and help the summoners. His purpose for being here was not clear then. The victim had to die during the ceremony, give blood and flesh to the demon, but still remained alive. The high priest's face was white as chalk. He understood everything. There would be no help. In despair, he asked what would happen to the empire. The ancient god placed his hand on his chest, as if swearing an oath. He was summoned into this world by Princess Rudis, and all the demon's power belongs to her. The minister of faith and the emperor were in shock. However, as was the girl herself. Both froze and silently pondered the master's speech. But he did not react to their state. Bennett looked at His Majesty, who remained silent. The emperor asked with some uncertainty what was going on. Now everything depended on the princess. Levain confirmed. If the princess doesn't want something, he won't lift a finger for these worthless people. The princess simply could not believe what was happening. Now the ancient deity had to carry out her orders. Only hers. The emperor was still on his knees, but he cried out that this could not be. It was simply impossible. But Levain calmly advised him to think it over carefully. If the emperor wanted to save the empire, he had to do one simple thing. Kneel before Princess Rudis. Before the daughter, he had humiliated all his life. The emperor looked away with an unseeing gaze. Then he looked for a while into the yellow eyes of the demon, and silently left the room. Levain turned to the high priest to heal the princess's leg. The priest bowed and agreed to perform the healing ritual. He gave his princess his hand, and invited her to come with him. The demon looked at the girl encouragingly, as if saying that everything would be fine. Rudis was very scared. No one had ever helped her in her entire life. She had rarely heard even a kind word. The father could show up at any moment. After everything that had happened, he was quite capable of taking out all his anger on his unloved daughter. The demon left the room. The girl turned to the minister of faith. She wanted to know what the supreme god could do now, but he himself did not know. After all, the demon was not a human. Besides, he had not appeared in this world for long, and the priest knew little about the lives of creatures outside of chaos. Just when he thought the Dark One had left, he would suddenly appear next to him, and vice versa. When Bennett didn't feel his presence, he would be a few centimeters away. The princess would soon understand this herself. The treatment of the sore leg was completed, and the high priest offered to take the girl to her room. Rudis really didn't want to go to her sister's bedroom. She imagined those maids who were wearing masks of goodness, but behind their backs they cursed. It was hard to bear. Then the priest suggested visiting the temple of God. He felt guilty before the princess. Although he was not the initiator, he was a participant in the sacrifice ceremony. Bennett offered to help find at least a temporary shelter until everything was sorted out. Even the emperor could not send knights to the temple. The girl sincerely thanked the priest. She was very grateful that he found the strength to apologize for everything. The priests in the church bowed to the guest and led her to the parish living room. They said that it was not often used, and they offered to find some kind of replacement. The room was magnificent. The decoration corresponded to the level of nobility and was worthy of a queen. The bedroom was completely suitable for the residence of a princess. Rudis thanked the clergyman from the bottom of her heart. It was obvious that these people were kind to her, and they sincerely wanted to help the princess. The temple servants left, and the girl lay down on the bed. It had been a very long and difficult day, and there was no strength left. The words of the ancient deity were ringing in his head, about the father kneeling before his daughter, if he wanted the demon's help. It turns out that Lavaine knew that the girl had been insulted and humiliated all her life, and also about her father's dislike and the antics of her younger sister. But there was no understanding of what to do now. Rudis did not want to use the power of the deity, but she could not abandon her people. And, of course, she did not want to become a puppet in the hands of her tyrant father anymore. As soon as she thought about it, something unpleasant happened. The priest announced that the emperor had arrived to see Her Highness. The girl was afraid of this meeting and at the same time was waiting for it. She sat on the bed and gave permission to let her father in. A firm decision matured in her head. From now on, she would rely only on herself in everything and take care of herself independently. The emperor was as menacing as ever. He entered with a firm step and stopped by the bed. But Rudis firmly decided for herself that she would never tremble at the sight of this man again. The gentleman addressed the princess by name, but he was immediately interrupted by a guard who entered. His breathing was rapid. The man was in a hurry to deliver news. The guard told the emperor something about Princess Selene. His face changed. He asked how the servants had allowed this to happen. In the end, he decided to talk to his daughter himself. Selena's room was in unimaginable chaos. Things were scattered, and some objects were broken. The servants asked for forgiveness and bowed to their mistress. The princess was shaking with sobs, lying on the bed. Her beautiful hair was scattered. Her hairstyle was ruined. The girl looked very pitiful. The father's heart was torn to pieces. After all, he was so strict with his favorite. Selena raised her tear-stained eyes and asked what Rudis had done that made her father exchange his beloved daughter for this wretched thing. The emperor thought about it. The reason he had performed the cursed ritual was much deeper. The existence of the empire was at risk. 3 years ago, the first attack from the eastern lands occurred. The mighty power of the empire began to bend under the onslaught of the enemy. The only way to strengthen their power was through the ritual of sacrifice, and then the once undisputed power would return. But Selena brought her father out of his reverie. She demanded that her room be returned, and that scoundrel Rudis be punished for her arrogance. After all, evil should not go unpunished. Father seemed to be in some kind of stupor. The master could not allow the efforts to disappear without a trace, and soon everything had to fall into place. In the new room of Rudis, at the table opposite each other, sat the father and the unloved daughter. The gentleman addressed the girl affectionately, but everything was written on her face. He only changed tactics in order to deceive again. Father offered to try to control the powers of the ancient deity. In return, he offered his love, to the same extent as for Selena. The parent had no intention of singling out one daughter and treating both equally. Rudis laughed at these words. There was always a difference, and there always would be. It was obvious that the father could not love the pathetic nuisance of his life as much as he loved his adored purebred daughter. There was no way to get even a drop of love from this man, and he could hardly be called a father. Rudis was amazed at herself. Never before had the girl been so determined. After the ritual, nothing could stop the princess. The parent was furious. His face turned red, and his teeth clenched tightly. These manipulations no longer made the same impression on Rudis as before. They seemed more like a farce. There were some conditions that the girl was going to put forward to her father. He wondered what it could be: imperial clothes and jewelry, servants from noble families, or punishment for those who treated the girl badly. Rudy said that her father had to fulfill 3 conditions if he wanted the girl to control Mr. Levain. The emperor could barely contain himself. The impudent woman was setting some conditions. His reaction was expected: anger and rage. But if the father wanted to achieve results, he had to humble his pride. Otherwise, his fate was to leave with nothing. Rudis had only 2 cards to play against the emperor, and she was wondering how she could use them. The first of them is Selena. She would be the best candidate for the sacrifice for the ceremony. But the demon had already been summoned. If the ritual was not repeated, this card was out. The second card was the emperor's reputation. Even though Rudis was his own daughter, she was treated like cattle. The clergy and the public could learn about it and react accordingly. And the ruling family feared gossip more than anything else. The subjects could stage a coup and overthrow both the family and the emperor. The coup could have been staged by any of the vassals. For example, Duke Ivana. The emperor was furious and almost stooped to insults, but he only squeezed the arms of the chair with force. This scoundrel wanted the emperor to hand over power to some god, like a snotty youth trembling with fear. The emperor could barely contain himself. Before, I would have definitely hit my daughter. Now I didn't dare, maybe because of Levain. But the girl didn't need anything from this tyrant. No love, no money, absolutely nothing. Now the father could not manipulate his daughter. Therefore, he was forced to respect and treat her as an equal. Otherwise, the dialogue would not take place. After thinking for a while, the emperor agreed. He was ready to listen to Rudis. What conditions she put forward. Although it was very difficult to hold a conversation, pride clouded his mind. The first condition was this: the demon's power would be used only in the interests of the empire, namely, stabilizing the situation and getting rid of monsters. Rudis agreed with this, but the monster attacks worried the girl the most at the moment, and the death of a large number of people. The emperor perked up. So, as soon as we managed to get rid of the monsters terrorizing the entire area, we could move on to other important matters. But the girl interrupted her father and put forward a second condition. The princess wanted to live outside the palace, to get rid of the environment in which there was no place for a normal relationship between a parent and an unloved daughter. The emperor pressed Rudis on where she wanted to live. She wanted to move to the Duchy of Arctis, and everything had to be notarized by one of the clergy. And finally, the third condition. The girl wanted to leave her family in order to protect herself from oppression. To do this, she used the power of a contract certified by the clergy. This would give her some time to finally break all ties with the emperor. The father roared that only an ungrateful woman would hide in another family, hiding behind the church. All the subjects would whisper that the emperor was a monster who treated his daughter badly. The man didn't understand why, of all places, Rudis chose Arctis. But the girl had her own point of view. It was the only acceptable option. Since ancient times, the Duchy of Arctis have been loyal vassals. They would defend the honor of the empire better than anyone else. The Arctis Duchy was the noble and just sword of the empire. It had existed since the foundation of the state. This family avoided politics. Every year, talented knights were released from under its wing, and the current Duke Dulio Arctis is now fighting on the front lines and mercilessly destroying monsters. Princess Celine was in love with the young Duke of Arctis, and as long as she got along with this young man, the Duke of Arctis would not harm Rudis. It was a dangerous choice, but of all the options, the best. Living in the Imperial Palace, the girl heard a lot about the relationship between Selena and the heir of the Arctis family, Serefis, and she hoped that this young man was like his grandfather. The princess finished her speech and looked at her father. The emperor took a pause and went off to his chambers to think. It was already deep into the night when her father gave his answer. The emperor, albeit reluctantly, accepted the conditions. Perhaps he pretended that he had done nothing wrong before, but Rudis remembered everything. Right now, the future of the people was the most important thing. Everything had to be done before Father changed his mind. There was so little time left. The princess had no strength left after today's events. Her eyes were sticking together, and the girl felt very tired. Suddenly, someone's hand fell on the fragile shoulder. Incredible warmth and calm emanated from it. Levane approached completely silently. The young man stood behind and held his hands, as if protecting the girl from all the troubles of the day. He picked up the princess in his arms and carried her to the bed. She was already fast asleep. Her calm face seemed to glow from within. Her skin was milky white. The demon touched her tender cheek with his palm, brushed aside her purple hair. From the outside, these two looked like a loving couple, where the man takes care of his woman. Levane laid the girl on the bed and stepped aside, and quietly said that the sleeping beauty had worked well today. Darkness swallowed everything around. Fear and blood surrounded everyone. Someone called Rudis by name. She was looking for the demon in this darkness. Suddenly, huge yellow eyes appeared before the girl. The bloody face of an ancient deity froze in chaos. The demon asked what she wanted, but the victim didn't know what to answer. What she really wanted more than anything else in the world. She couldn't formulate her request clearly. Thoughts blurred. So that no one could ever again. Strong male hands supported the girl lying on the bloody floor. In the princess's chambers, the table was set for breakfast. The sun had already risen high and filled the room with bright light through the large windows. The girl was puzzled as to how she had slept for so long. Apparently, fatigue had taken its toll. The priest reported that, on the orders of the high priest, he had not woken Rudis up on purpose so that she could rest properly. It seems that the princess dreamed of something very important last night, something that much depended on. She needed to put her thoughts in order, and Rudis asked permission to walk alone. The priest bowed and said that while the princess was in the temple of God, she was not in any danger. The high priest ordered to help in all the affairs of Her Highness, and the princess could use any corner at her discretion. From now on, the temple was under the protection of the Almighty himself. Rudis felt free in this place. She even wondered if she had ever felt this way before in her life. Suddenly, someone's voice pulled the girl out of her thoughts. Very familiar. It was the supreme deity Levane. The princess looked around. This garden had always been huge, with cascading waterfalls and a labyrinth of scarlet roses. But the demon was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, the princess saw him. The Dark One was standing by a huge tree. It was as if covered with ice. The bark and branches were so silvery. The boy was turned to face the ancient tree and seemed to be talking to it. Rudis called out to the young man, and he turned to the call. He asked if the girl had had a good rest. At the same time, a slight smile played on the man's lips. Surprisingly, the princess looked cheerful, despite her restless sleep. The demon said that he knew that the father had visited his daughter. Rudis thought that the man already knew everything. She could not understand this man. Perhaps she would never be able to understand. This man was very caring, and even sympathized with the princess. But he never interfered directly in her problems. Dark seemed to read the girl's thoughts, and noted that he did not dare to go forward, because Rudis never clearly formulated her requests. The demon could only interfere if his mistress knew what she wanted specifically, and voiced it, even in what directly concerns the girl herself. It was easy to say, but the practical side was unclear. Then Levane laughed and decided to demonstrate his capabilities with an example. I asked the princess what her favorite season was. She loved spring the most. And suddenly, the birds started chirping and flowers bloomed. It was some kind of magic. But the demon explained that changing the age of creatures was one of the most refined and simple abilities. The man picked up a withered leaf. He often dealt with death and destruction, and rejuvenation of living organisms was the easiest technique. However, Rudis noticed one very strange thing: that the flowers had blossomed, causing the tree to grow old. The girl asked in surprise. It turned out that Levane could change everything at any time and in any place. He agreed, if only it was within his power. However, Levane explained that his power has its limits, and he is not as omnipotent as he seems. But many wanted this power. The entire empire wanted it, not just the emperor. Rudy's should have thought about what she was getting herself into. So, before that happens, the girl must say what she wants. Otherwise, the demon has no reason to exist on Earth and was summoned from the depths of chaos in vain. But Rudis's thoughts wandered around the ritual of sacrifice and the magic circle, where the weak victim, the princess, sat in the very center. The demon hurried her. She needed to decide on her desire. Then Rudis finally formulated what she wanted: for Levane to save the Empire from the monsters that were exterminating the people. The Dark One smirked slightly. This wish was a little vague, and it was not at all what the princess herself wanted. The demon asked not to lie to herself, not to be an obedient daughter who wanted to save the Empire, and to please her father. The girl did not agree. After all, the Empire's desire coincided with the desire of the princess of this state. But Levane asked her to think about it. Perhaps it would be a stupid request, but for her personally, Rudis never wanted anything for herself. She simply had no right to it. Even when she lived in the palace, the princess had nothing, because she had been locked up all her life and had not really seen anything in life. Levane asked the girl not to hurry, and to think carefully about her wish. When it was formulated, to tell it to the demon. Although there was little time left, the girl thought about her bitter life. All her life she dreamed of leaving the castle. It was a pity that the demon had not appeared earlier. Levane asked why the princess wanted to leave the palace, and what she would do next. She herself did not know. The only great desire was to be free, and that was exactly what the Dark One wanted to hear. The supreme deity heard the wish. He waited 5,000 years to come to this world and fulfill it. The man approached the girl and took her head in his hands. The warmth that had become habitual ran through her body. Rudis nevertheless quietly whispered that it was necessary not to forget about destroying monsters. The demon accepted this request as well. But then the princess had to go with him. After all, the man couldn't leave her alone, and they had to work together to destroy the monsters. Levane warned that his methods were not entirely humane. He wanted the princess to know that, but it wouldn't be hard to protect her. Then Rudis said that they needed to prepare for the trip to war. If the princess left the castle, there would be chaos, and the number of victims would increase. The demon agreed with this. All people depended on each other. Although the population was large, it was difficult to survive alone. This was a feature of human society. Rudis decided to ask for help from the temple and the Arctis Duchy. This would significantly reduce the time to resolve the issue. But until then, Levane had no orders, and he said that if anything was needed, all that was needed was to call the ancient god. The demon would come to the call at any time of the day or night, just as he came from chaos into this world. All he had to do was call the supreme deity. The huge mansion of the Arctis Duchy was surrounded by greenery. Princess Celine visited it. She was drinking tea in the dining room, waiting for the reception. The maid reported that an hour had already passed, but the Duke was busy with urgent matters, and she suggested visiting him next time. The blonde beauty was furious. An hour had already passed since she had been waiting for an audience. This had never happened before. Selena started screaming. No one dared to treat her like that. Nothing could be more important than this lady's visit. It wasn't that they met very often, but it had never happened before. There was no disrespect. Seraphis always greeted them cheerfully and spoke politely. Could the young Duke be embarrassed by the fact that Celine was a princess? It was no longer important, since the father began to negotiate their marriage. Suddenly, the maid reported that the gentleman had arrived. The grandson of Duke Arctis appeared in all his beauty. In his ceremonial uniform, the young man looked like a young green-eyed god of war. Selena ran up to the young man, and immediately forgot about all the omissions and grievances. She chirped that she had been waiting for a meeting for a very long time, but he very coldly reported that he could not spare a minute of his time for the princess. He was forced to leave the state, and he came to say goodbye, having learned that the girl had been waiting for an hour. Selena was not used to such treatment, but, having pulled herself together, she asked to explain what had happened. Seraphis agreed, saying that he did not intend to tolerate when someone played with his feelings. The girl did not understand what was happening. After all, a good relationship with the princess could bring a lot of benefit to the young duke, and she could become a sovereign after an alliance with him. That is, in essence, a person who has full power in the state. Without a specific term and conditions, Seriphus bowed silently and announced that it was time for him to leave. Perhaps that was all the talking for today. The princess demanded to know the reasons for the young man's rudeness. He did not respond to such an angry tirade. Only when leaving did he say that he had received a message from the high priest. And now he was heading to the temple. The high priest visited the chambers of Princess Rudies. She asked how things were going with her acceptance under the patronage of the Duchy of Arctis. With a bow, he assured that the duke had accepted the offer. Although at first it did not interest him very much. But by the end of the conversation, he was very furious and accepted all the conditions. The duke himself had gone to war. If it had not been for this fact, there would have been a great commotion. Instead, his grandson, Arctis's heir, Sir Seriphus, was to arrive. Rudies was not personally acquainted with the young man. She had only heard that he and Selena had a rather tender relationship. Bennett reported that Sir Seriphus was the heir and current lord of the Righteous Sword, the Duchy of Arctis, a man who could be trusted completely. The priest reported that Lord Arctis had arrived. Rudies was worried, because it seemed the young man had not been informed of the situation with the princess. Several monks bowed in greeting. They paid their respects to the high priest, the princess, and the young duke. He was very surprised to see an unfamiliar girl in the temple. His emerald eyes grew even bigger in surprise. It was easy to understand why Selena fell in love with Seriphus. Her Highness introduced herself. Rudies Amaryllis. The boy was embarrassed. He did not know who was in front of him. He asked to forgive him for not watching his manners. He said that he had been sent by the Duke of Arctis to serve the princess. And he bowed, kissing the lady's hand. Rudies froze. At the end of the corridor, she saw her sister Selena. She was standing in such a way that she was almost invisible. Selena would never have allowed this to happen before. She was clearly avoiding her favorite, and she didn't want to catch his eye. Perhaps the rumors about their warm relationship were greatly exaggerated. Seriphus noticed how Princess Rudies froze and tensed up. She decided for herself that she needed to figure everything out. For now, she couldn't trust anyone unconditionally. Politely freeing her hand, the girl hurried to say goodbye. The young man said that a place had been prepared for Her Highness in the duchy, and she could stay there as long as her heart desired. He also informed that the princess has been assigned personal security, and anyone who wishes to meet her must obtain permission. Finally, the unloved daughter had a chance to escape from her father. The girl's face showed what a relief it was for her. Rudies asked when it would be possible to move out of the temple, and the Duke suggested right now. The girl immediately agreed. Sir Seriphus volunteered to escort the princess to the Duchy of Arctis immediately, and assured that the young lady was in no danger when she was with the Duke's heir. The only thing that was disconcerting was the contract provided by the temple. It was simply insulting. By signing it, this young lady was disowning her family. The monks escorted the princess to the carriage and bid her farewell warmly. The carriage was completely ready, and Sir Seriphus opened the door with the golden coat of arms. And then Rudies saw Selena again. She was hiding behind a column and watching what was happening from afar. They had to leave the palace immediately before her sister did something. The carriage drove away from the temple gates. The coachman received instructions to go to Arctis. The priests and the high priest still stood with their heads bowed. This was the first time the princess left the palace grounds. And even there, this bastard was not allowed to go everywhere. The girl looked out the carriage window and realized that this was freedom. Finally, the young duke announced that they had arrived at their destination. The ducal residence was a beautiful palace with turrets and columns. The carriage drove up to the front entrance, where servants were already lined up to greet them. The princess got out of the carriage, but as soon as she stepped on her sore leg, it immediately twisted, causing pain. Seriphus supported the girl, preventing her from falling. But as soon as he touched her, it was as if the young man had been struck by electricity. It was as if something was protecting the princess. Maybe some magic. The young man stepped back and asked if everything was okay. The left leg. It began to hurt again. Rudies became worried. She had only just arrived, and already she was causing trouble to such a hospitable house. But the young man informed her that the lady needed rest. The young man volunteered to personally escort the lady to her room. After all, she needed to rest from the journey. The young duke opened the door to a bright, richly furnished room, and said that from now on, this was the princess's room, and if she didn't like anything, they would immediately find another room. The room was luxurious, richly furnished, but at the same time very refined. It had absolutely everything a lady could need. Sir Seriphus asked Rudis to remain in the room until she recovered. Her leg needed rest and limited movement. The young man knelt down and asked permission to examine his injured leg. If necessary, he could call a doctor. The girl almost cried. She had long since come to terms with her peculiarity, but Seriphus did not know that the trauma had been there since the girl's birth. If the princess decided to stay in the duchy, she had to tell the truth. She said that she was limping not because of a bruise or a wound. This problem has been with her all her life, and it cannot be cured. No matter how hard she tried to step on her sore leg, it simply wouldn't support her body. And every night, for 20 years now, the girl woke up in a cold sweat because of her numb leg. How many prayers were said so that the sore leg would finally be cured? But it was useless. There was no point in treating it. Seriphus listened attentively to the story and asked if the emperor had ever called a physician or healer to the princess. But she repeated again that the injury was incurable. The young man disagreed. To resign oneself when one has tried everything is one thing, but to give in without doing anything is quite another. And then he asked for forgiveness. It was too reckless to blame the lady for this, but he said that he could try to heal the leg. Although the young man was a warrior, he had experience working in a medical unit. During the first expedition to the monsters, he acquired it due to the shortage of doctors. Rudis was a little hesitant, but the young gentleman sincerely wanted to help. He asked permission to examine the sore leg. Asking the lady to take a deep breath, he took her leg in his hands and quickly felt the sore spot. The girl screamed from the sharp pain. Everything was even worse than he expected. Rudis was shaking all over. Her face was distorted by a grimace of pain. His hands on her leg were causing some unnatural pain. Seriphus didn't understand what was happening. But where he touched the princess's skin, it was as if fire was spreading, and she couldn't stand it any longer. It was too hot. Suddenly, the young man saw a magic circle on the girl's body, a clear sign of something supernatural. It was simply impossible, but the princess herself had no idea. All she knew was that it appeared on her body after the ritual. From time to time, this sign glowed and shone brightly. Seriphus thought, if this symbol was connected to a ritual, then the temple had to be involved to find the cause. And now the lady should rest and enjoy a delicious meal. But Rudis couldn't relax. After all, the Arctis duchy that had accepted her was in a difficult position. However, the heir still helped Her Highness, and the girl was very grateful to the true noble protector. Seriphus was perplexed. The princess was too naive. She had only recently been betrayed, and she had already entrusted her body to a stranger. Besides, there was one nuance. The Arctis duchy was currently in conflict with the emperor. But while the war with the monsters was going on, he could not openly threaten. And to end the war, someone appeared from whom power can be borrowed. An ancient deity that is subject to Rudis. Her existence is invaluable to the empire. Seriphus was sure that the princess was aware of the demon's power, but she still thanked the ordinary man, as if no one had ever given her a drop of kindness and compassion. Perhaps it was the result of the emperor's tyranny and cruel treatment, and the princess simply did not respect herself. It seems that the girl was simply intimidated. The young man's fists clenched in anger. Not loving one's own daughter was not a worthy quality for a man, especially an emperor. He was suddenly distracted by a footman entering. The lord ordered to bring the princess tasty food, warm clothes, and to make sure that the fireplace was always burning. After all, it was quite cool at night. The atmosphere in the imperial palace was gloomy. Celine had been in a depressed state lately. The noble ladies-in-waiting were constantly discussing the situation. The young lady of Viscount Rail's family complained that she had suffered enough when she had to settle a ragamuffin in Celine's chambers. And when the emperor raised his voice to his beloved daughter, the servants thought about their terrible fate. Yesterday, all the kitchen maids were punished. The gardener was treated even more harshly. All his property was taken away, and he was thrown out of the palace. The young lady of the Ivana family was also upset. After all, at such times, even the emperor's daughter had no support, not to mention the simple servants. And all the ladies agreed on one thing. It all happened after the summoning ceremony. Perhaps not a very successful one. Lady Esther Ivana casually asked the others what they thought about it. In her opinion, the summoned deity was somewhat strange. Another maid reported that the ancient deity was rumored to only obey Princess Rudis, and there were also rumors that it was not a real deity. Esther listened very carefully. It was important to know what was being whispered about in the palace. Rita Vale continued. Princess Selene did not prevent rumors. On the contrary, she created them. So the rumor that the ancient deity was not real came from Selena. Lady Ivana quickly confirmed that she also supported this opinion. After all, if the god was real, then why did his victim survive? Esther nodded her head. At the same time, she noted to herself that Princess Selene was sowing discord, and also that Lady Vale was very stupid. In her room, Lady Ivana was talking to her assistant Giselle. She was asking what the lady was going to do. After all, the situation was already getting out of control. The girl did not believe that Princess Selena had taken such a desperate step out of jealousy, and her mistress would have a hard time being the princess's companion because rumors were spreading throughout the palace. Lady Esther explained that the problem was not with Selene, but with the ancient deity, and the rumors that it was not real were not true. Before the ceremony, Esther bribed one of the servants, and he confirmed that, after her, the crypt was empty. In addition, Lavaine appeared immediately after the ritual was performed, and the most important thing that must be strictly adhered to is to never cross the path of an ancient deity. Father sent a letter in which he clearly stated this. Do not resist the will of the dark deity, and under no circumstances cast a shadow on his power. The true power of the deity was spoken of in the Alpha. This was the first document, also known as Kitab al-Azif. The Duchy of Ivana and the temple had long maintained good relations, and long ago, the temple handed over this document as a sign of loyalty. The Duchy of Ivana cherished and cared for this relic. The heiress of Ivana had not yet had the chance to read this paper, but, most likely, it contained information about the great deity. The one who helped Rudis get out of the crypt was that demon. Meanwhile, Selena was losing her influence by spreading stupid rumors. Now Lady Esther had something to do, to get rid of one trouble. She called her maid and said something in her ear. In the main temple, a priest was talking to a girl in a long dress. She told him what she knew. The priest cried out that this information was strictly controlled by the temple, but the interlocutor was trying to get confirmation that nothing had happened. The priest wanted to make sure that what he had just heard was true. His Imperial Majesty, accompanied by his retinue, arrived at the temple. The priest bowed, greeting the high personage. The emperor came in a hurry to find out the truth. He addressed the Minister of Faith directly, and he began to speak. 3 days later, at the residence of the Duchy of Arctis, Sir Seraphis spoke with the princess. The conversation was not an easy one. The girl was surprised that he called Hartu. That was the first destination. But this region suffered the least from the invasion of monsters. Rudis knew that Harta was a rich region that had not been touched by death and destruction. The only reason for concern was the financial situation. There were regions that were in the greatest need of emergency aid. Seraphis was in the background. It was not he who was deciding such an important issue. The decision was made at a noble assembly. If Harta could be saved, its nobility would be indebted to the empire. The princess did not want to interfere in the affairs of the imperial court. The main thing for her was to prepare for her own freedom, and yet it was wrong. She couldn't accept it. After all, it would mean sacrificing the common people for the well-being of the nobles. The princess asked the duke's opinion. Did Seraphis support this choice? That Harta was a priority. Meanwhile, in the main building of the meeting hall, a meeting of the noble council was being held. The main delegates of the noble families were sitting at a round table. The emperor reported that Harta was the first appointment for the ancient deity. Also on the agenda was the need to resolve some misunderstandings. The imperial palace had been in a state of discord lately, and it was necessary to resolve this issue at any cost and to establish order and discipline. Everyone at the table started talking at once. Everyone was interested in whether the ancient deity really obeyed only Princess Rudis and whether she had enough influence on him. The emperor looked around at those present. The mere appearance of the ancient deity made many switch sides. Those who had recently trembled before the authorities. His thoughts were interrupted by a servant who reported that Princess Rudis had arrived, accompanied by the Duke of Arctis. The emperor had given permission to enter. It had been a short time since his daughter left the palace. However, it was immediately obvious how much prettier she had become. Her whole appearance said that she was a real princess. Again, there was whispering at the table. Everyone knew that Seriphus was Selena's betrothed, but now he was accompanying another princess. The emperor asked about the purpose of the visit. After all, the ungrateful daughter had abandoned her own father for the Duchy of Arctis. Rudis was no longer the downtrodden girl she once was, and she could not be shamed with such mean moves. The princess said that it was more likely that the father had thrown the daughter out than that she had abandoned the parent. The emperor was forced to change the subject. He demanded to know the reason why Rudis had interrupted the meeting. The girl raised her chin, and in a firm voice, she declared that there was a reason. Instead of Harta, she would first go to Vignode. The emperor jumped up from his seat. Vignode had passed all 5 levels of infection, and now he was at the final stage. It was too late to drive the monsters out. After that, it would have taken a huge amount of money to restore Vignode. Raising his voice, he asked why Rudis had come and interrupted important discussions. Then the girl asked to name the real reason for choosing Harta as the first point. It was the enormous wealth of the local nobility, and not the nonsense about the necessary emergency aid. The princess still demanded to name a good reason for choosing Harta as number 1. Then she would go to this place without delay. Count Cloudon spoke in defense of the emperor. It was wrong to say that the empire abandoned those who needed help just for the sake of profit. Rudis shamed the honorary member of the noble council. It turned out that Harta was in a worse position than Vignode. The count was embarrassed. He said that Her Highness did not know the real state of affairs. There were many valuable resources and objects in Hart. Their loss would be significant for the empire. Rudis countered that it had nothing to do with the common people, and the resources were used only for the false luxury of the elite. Other members also spoke up, that the princess accuses them of cynicism, doesn't know the real needs of the state, and it's better for her to focus on leaving. Suddenly, the door to the meeting room opened, and someone asked everyone to immediately stop making useless comments. A red-haired, handsome man entered the hall. He looked like Atlas, who had stepped out of a painting. The young man asked the girl if everything was okay. The thought flashed through Rudis's mind that it was him. Earl Abbot looked like a true deity. Those present were instantly alarmed. The count was talking nonsense. Perhaps he was out of his mind. But he was adamant. Any passerby on the street will say the same. Helping Vignode instead of Harta would be more beneficial to the empire. The young man looked at everyone present, and added that those present had probably forgotten why they had gathered here. Princess Rudis turned to the emperor and firmly stated that Vignode would be the first destination. The father looked up. He looked at his daughter for a few seconds, and agreed with her, saying that she was right. The princess was slightly embarrassed. The emperor agreed suspiciously easily, and accepted all the conditions, but he cast a heavy glance at those present and explained that everything had been confirmed, and the ancient deity was not a fake. However, the monk reported to him that in some way this deity was not complete, since it did not possess the full power of the gods. In other words, an ancient demigod. Rudis didn't understand why the emperor had changed his mind so abruptly, but the decision had been made, and one thing was clear. She would begin the fight against the monsters with Vignode. The question immediately arose of when the princess was going to leave. There was no time to waste, and it was decided to leave the next day at dawn. But the emperor was very categorical. No matter what difficulties his daughter faced on the battlefield, there would be no help from the imperial family. Rudis understood something from the look of His Majesty. He did not believe in the power of the ancient deity, and he was sending his daughter to certain death. Perhaps that was why he accepted her conditions. If nothing had happened in Vigneaux, Rudis would have become a pawn in a chess game again. The Arctis residence was covered by evening twilight. The maid was busy helping Rudis. She gave her a warm blanket, because the night promised to be cold. She also reported that the whole day was spent preparing the crew. Everyone hoped that the journey would be safe. Therefore, the lady should not worry. Butler Arian brought food supplies for the journey and some things. He presented them to the princess with respect, saying that this was all for a comfortable journey. Rudis had never been courted like this. She was used to getting by with little. That's why she was very embarrassed by such attention. But he said that the servants had prepared the crew of their own free will. Therefore, he asked not to refuse and not to offend them. The girl almost cried. These people were so kind, even though because of her, their only heir was forced to go to the very hell of the empire. The butler replied that the entire Arctis duchy was very grateful to the princess, that she was very brave and agreed to fight the monsters. After all, the duke asked many people for help. There was not enough money, troops, or resources. At first, many helped, but only to show false participation in solving the problem. Once the situation worsened, it became difficult to get Arctis to support them in return. Supplies were cut back, but even that was wasteful, and aid was cut off altogether. Weak support still remained, but rather out of pity rather than fulfillment of allied obligations. The duchy alone bore the burden of defending the empire, fulfilling a common duty to the people, while others neglected it. Rudis thanked Arian again. She was ready to join the fight. And then the duke would not feel alone. The princess woke up when the sun had not yet appeared above the horizon. Thoughts about the expedition did not give her any rest, and Rudis decided to go out onto the balcony to breathe fresh air. It was quite chilly, and the princess wrapped herself in a warm cloak. Suddenly, someone from behind said that it was still early and it was time to sleep a little. It was Levain. As usual, he was very calm. He thanked him with a smile for giving him a personal horse. Seriphus had prepared a good steed. Rudis looked at the young man very thoughtfully. After all, the ancient deity did not need this whole horse thing, but Levain just wanted to feel like a human. The princess was very worried about the upcoming trip. Would it go smoothly? Moreover, her father's words did not give her any peace. After all, he refused any help. The girl looked through the old books that the temple was able to provide, but she did not find any mention of the power of the ancient deities. Levain asked what the beauty was thinking about. She told him about her worries. Even if it was dark with them, it didn't mean that everything would go smoothly. But the demon laughed. He laughed without stopping. This was not at all what the princess should be thinking about at the moment. He said that she would soon see for herself. As long as the ancient deity was nearby, the princess should not worry. Fear and hope flashed in the purple eyes. Sitting in the carriage, the princess turned over in her head Levain's words. He was sure that there was no need to worry about the power of the ancient deity. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the carriage window. Sir Seriphus informed her that the border had just been crossed. From that moment on, they were outside the capital. Suddenly, the princess's attention was drawn to the sky. Blood-red flashes were visible in the direction where Vigneaux and Guihéme were. These two regions had reached the final stage of destruction, and the changes could be seen even from such a distance. Although they were 10 days away, the princess urgently needed to figure this out, and she called Sir Seriphus. He directed the horse to the carriage. The girl asked to clarify what the term final stage meant, and the warrior agreed to explain it. The Empire assigned one of 5 levels of contamination of the earth by monsters. There were no casualties at the first stage, but the red energy slowly began to spread, and people suffered from fever. At level 3, people were already dying. Migration from the contaminated area to other areas was prohibited. Entry into the affected region was restricted. When the area reached the 5th level, the monsters fully settled in. The weak people were hunted. Only adults were left alive. Rudis assumed that the 5th level was the last. But Seriphus explained that the information was classified and secretly transmitted by the military to the Imperial Palace. This knowledge was strictly controlled. There was also the so-called final stage. It meant that the monsters began to perform ceremonies. The princess turned her head and saw Lavain in another window. He was also listening to the young warrior's story. He only added that people seemed to understand that their end had come. That's why they called the stage the final one. Rudies couldn't understand how monsters could perform ceremonies. After all, they were inferior creatures with very limited intelligence. Lavain also couldn't help himself. He wondered why the emperor was silent about all these matters, and especially about the ceremonies. The girl did not understand why these ceremonies were needed at all, and how monsters could conduct them. Seraphis sat with his head down, and Lavain just chuckled. The two men knew what was going on. Finally, the Dark One explained everything to Rudies. Monsters perform these ceremonies to turn people into their own kind, into monsters. These ceremonies were called the final stage. If they were to be held en masse, the entire human race would gradually disappear. That is, they would be replaced by monsters. And so they will devour the cities one by one. In the end, when everyone has become a monster, the empire will be defeated. They stopped for the night in a forest clearing in a safe place. The men made a fire as the night was cold. The princess was very upset. Sleep was out of the question. She could not believe that the empire could fall overnight like that. The young duke came to see if everything was all right. Seeing how upset the girl was, he apologized. He should have told her everything earlier. But Rudies asked not to apologize. After all, there was no time for that. It was necessary to think through all the details. The girl was worried about what would happen to people who had already become monsters. Most likely, there were already some like that in Vigneaux. They would most likely just be killed. Rudies asked Lavain about this. She asked if it was possible to turn those who had already become monsters back into humans. The ancient deity did not know this. Perhaps something was known to the real God, whom the priests served. However, God did not interfere in the affairs of people. The focus had to be on helping the citizens of the empire who were in pain. Rudies knew what it was like to be abandoned. For many years in the palace, that was exactly how she lived. People who found themselves in exactly the same situation as the princess were ignored. And in all likelihood, they would have to be killed. It was too much of a burden for the fragile girl to bear. A hand in a brown glove lay on her hands. The young duke understood how difficult it was to endure this, but he was there, and he asked not to take everything on his shoulders alone. The warrior sincerely wanted all the monsters to be destroyed. To do this, they had to endure sorrows and hardships together. Sir Seraphis strongly recommended that the princess sleep while she had the chance, so that she could think clearly tomorrow. The young man looked into the princess's eyes. It was as if a green sea had touched the purple sky of her eyes. It seemed he wanted to say something else, but he just silently got out of the carriage. There was no strength left to stay inside. And Rudies also decided to go out and breathe the night air. It was quite cold, and dawn had not yet even broken. Suddenly, a man's hand fell on her shoulder. A cry of fear escaped her mouth from surprise. Of course, it was Lavain. His eyes were slightly narrowed. He was not asking, but asserting, that it seemed that Seraphis had visited the princess that night. He also assumed that the young duke was saying some pleasant and tender words to the girl. Rudies opened her mouth in protest, but the demon interrupted. Saying that he had merely assumed it, Rudies suddenly thought that there might not have been a very good relationship between Lavain and the duke. For a while the young people were silent, and they just looked at the fire. Each one was thinking about his own. But suddenly, the ancient deity spoke to Rudies in a quiet voice. He asked if she liked gentle words and good deeds. The princess looked up at the Dark One. It seemed that he had become interested in human nature. She confirmed that all people were pleased with warm words. However, the young man's gaze was very serious. He asked her not to listen to the empty words of the pompous air. The only one Rudies really needed was standing in front of her. The girl wanted to say something, but they were interrupted by a warrior who approached. He said that it was time to move on. The days on the road flew by, and on the 10th day of the journey, Sir Seraphis reported that they had arrived at the entrance to Vigneaux. From there, they had to go on foot. Standing in front of the castle gates, Rudis was horrified by the terrible picture. The half-destroyed fortress wall seemed to be painted with blood, and instead of air, there was a red haze. The young duke ordered the rest to wait for his signal rocket. If it was blue, they had to wait for the group to return. If it was red, they had to run away immediately and report everything to the emperor. Lavaine turned to Seraphis, offering to stay outside with everyone else. But the warrior made it clear that he was going inside with the deity and the princess. A terrible picture opened up on the streets of the city. Rivers of blood flowed along the ground. Buildings were destroyed. Skeletons and skulls lay right on the streets. Vile slime was everywhere. The princess looked at this picture with horror, and she understood that there were probably no survivors in this hell. However, the demon did not agree. The sky had not yet completely turned black, so the ritual was not over. And, probably, someone else was still alive. Rudy scolded herself for not acting sooner, as soon as she learned of it, but the young duke asked her not to blame herself. The preparations had taken some time. The girl was determined. She asked where the monsters were, so that she could quickly head there and save the surviving people. Sir Seraphis immediately swore to see the princess off immediately, but suddenly a red mist began to creep up on them. It became difficult to breathe, and the girl swayed and stumbled. Lavaine managed to support the young lady. He held the princess tightly by the shoulders and let go only after making sure that everything was okay. It was getting harder to breathe. The demon was not human, and the young duke could not catch his breath all this time. He offered to carry the princess in his arms. The girl felt helpless and worthless. The warrior picked Rudis up in his arms. The Dark One followed him through the red stream of blood. The princess was thinking about how she could gain strength, at least a little strength. Finally, the duke announced that they had come to the place where the monsters had gathered. The former palace was covered in slime and blood. The walls and towers were half ruined. The sounds of songs that enveloped all of Vigneaux came from this place, but the building was inaccessible. Seraphis suggested that they would have to break down the door, but Lavaine quietly said that it was not necessary to do so. Rudis turned to the demon. She asked what alternative method he proposed. Lavaine asked the girl to give the order as soon as she saw the monsters. After all, the supreme deity had arrived here to fulfill the princess's wishes. And to begin the action, he needed detailed instructions. It was only necessary to try to formulate and give the order clearly. Just one word was enough, and the princess asked. She ordered the door to be unlocked. The supreme deity was waiting for this very much, and he instantly fulfilled the wish of his princess. Rudis was surprised. The demon opened the door so quickly. After all, she thought that it was necessary to read some spells for this. But Lavaine had already stepped inside, and the companions had no choice but to follow him through the dark abyss of the gate. It was even scarier inside than outside. The air had darkened noticeably. Slime and blood were everywhere, and claw marks, and it seemed like thousands of eyes were watching their every move. Rudis hesitated for a second, but the young duke pushed her forward. They had to go up the stairs and not look back. The princess wanted to ask many questions at once, but Seraphis was very focused. There was no time for conversation at all. The higher the young men climbed, the more clearly they heard the chants. They became louder and louder. This meant one thing. There were monsters ahead. Lavaine climbed a few steps higher, and suddenly turned around, asked Rudis to come closer, and extended his hand to meet her. The princess both trusted and feared this demigod. But finally, she made up her mind and approached him, and she put her palm into his strong hand. He pressed the girl to himself, and took in his hand the ancient medallion that hung around her neck. They stood like that for some time. The supreme deity asked the princess not to worry. She would soon understand everything. Rudis raised her purple eyes, and fear and determination were visible in them at the same time. Finally, they reached the very top, and found themselves at a stone wall with a small oak door. A black substance similar to resin was showing through the cracks, and a red fog was creeping in. As if on cue, everyone stopped. No one dared to take another step. Only the princess looked at Lavaine with a pleading look. Suddenly, the massive door was illuminated by a bright white light. And when the light dissipated, A dark opening gaped in its place. The door seemed to have disappeared. This time, the princess didn't even need to voice her request to open the door. After all, she had already done it just recently, and the demon only needed one look from his mistress. There was chaos outside the door, black shadows on red walls, screams and groans, blood and mucus, and chants. And this was hell to go through. People were writhing here and there. One man's heart seemed to have been torn out alive. Blood was flowing from his eyes and mouth. He was screaming inhumanly. Suddenly, a dark shadow fell on the bloody pavement. It was shapeless and terrifying, but the monster casting it was even more terrifying. On the monster's head were several grinning mouths with razor-sharp teeth, and a huge glowing red pentacle, in the center of which was the vertical pupil of a single eye. And this hellish monster was approaching. Rudis was already trembling with fear, but seeing the monster so close, she almost lost consciousness. It seemed the monster had noticed them. Sir Seraphis shouted to the princess to watch out. After all, there were several more monsters in the distance, advancing. Next to that terrible monster, others appeared. They were inexorably approaching, and Rudis thought that this was the end. They were in the clutches of the monsters before they could do anything. They didn't want to die. Just like that, without even trying to fight. The princess did not want such a terrible fate. She closed her eyes and in despair began to beg someone to come to her aid. Let someone help her survive. Tears were pouring from her eyes. But Rudis kept repeating the same thing over and over again. She begged to destroy every single monster in Vineyard. Suddenly, something happened. It was as if all sounds had suddenly been turned off. The cries for help, the slurping sounds of body eaters, and the horrific chants. The princess was afraid to open her eyes. She had already died once. It seemed that now death had come for her finally. But suddenly, the girl heard a familiar voice. Lavaine simply reported that everything was done. A wonderful picture opened up before Rudis. The red fog had disappeared somewhere. The sun was shining over the city, and the blue sky was an incredible shade. But most importantly, all the monsters disappeared, as if they had never been there. The square was filled with living people. They were joyfully making noise and hugging each other. Men and women smiled. And looking at their hands and feet, they shouted that they were back, as if the city had returned from the hell in which it had been for many years. The princess could not understand how this could happen. What really happened? But the demon asked about her wish. After all, this is what the girl wanted more than anything in the world. After all, she ordered the supreme deity to deal with the monsters. And she clearly asked for it. The demon wiped away the tears that flowed from his purple eyes with his hand, and admired the princess. Everything came true exactly as his dear Rudis wished. The rescued people were placed in one of the palace halls. The provisions and supplies brought from Arctis were taken from the convoy. A new life was beginning for these residents. People rejoiced around their savior, returning to their newly granted life. But the girl was gripped by a terrible fear. Her hands clasped her knees and shook with a fine tremor. She would have died if the ancient deity had not used its magical power. The princess did not understand what kind of power it was, but the most important thing was that this power depended on her. After all, the Dark One could use his skills against people in the same way, and not just against monsters. And the princess was also worried about how much she could control Lavaine. The demon stood to the side and looked at Rudis, as if he read her thoughts. But then Sir Seraphis came up. He said that the freed people wanted to greet the princess. She was very surprised. If Her Highness did not want this, the young duke would refuse the people. But the girl did not understand why the survivors wanted to thank the princess. People waved their hands in greeting, clapped their hands, and shouted Rudis' name. They said words of gratitude. She saved them. People survived thanks to her. Otherwise, everyone would have died. A young woman of obvious high birth stepped forward. She introduced herself as a descendant of the Alcester family. Bellona Alcester bowed deeply. She said that her people were indebted to Her Highness beyond repayment, and from now on, the subjects would be loyal only to the princess. Rudis was extremely surprised. After all, subjects must be loyal to His Majesty the Emperor. Moreover, the girl only brought an ancient deity here, and did not fight the monsters personally. Bellona bowed deeply once more. Although the demigod had dealt with the monsters, the princess was the one who had contributed to this victory. Up until this point, Vigneaux had received no help from the government. They thought there was no need for it and gave up on the region. The ruler of Vigneaux fell to one knee. She asked forgiveness for her insolence and begged to accept the oath of allegiance of her people. The princess thought that these people were very desperate. After all, she did what any normal person in her place could do. The girl raised her eyes to those present, and she accepted the oath of this people. Everyone bowed before her for a moment, and then cries of jubilation filled the square. From that day on, the people of Vigneaux were subjects of Princess Rudy. They swore to be her shield and sword if need be. Anyone who dared to harm Her Highness would become their direct enemy. Everyone thanked her once again for saving them. Every subject swore to strictly follow the orders and instructions of their princess. Late in the evening, the convoy set out in the opposite direction. Towards morning, it was decided to stop in a safe place and feed the horses. And it wouldn't hurt to warm up ourselves. The girl was sitting by the fire. Suddenly, a man's hand touched her cheek. She raised her hand in fear, defending herself from the intrusion. Lavaine apologized for scaring you. He just wanted to ask how the princess was feeling. She was very tired after all. Rudis pulled back a little, coming to her senses. But the demon realized that the girl was afraid of him. It seemed she already regretted everything. But Lavaine asked the princess not to move away, and to be close. She raised her eyes. He asked her for something, probably because she freed the demon from chaos. But he knelt before Rudis and said that he would believe his mistress, no matter what she said. The girl had already suffered enough because of people's lies. The princess didn't understand why all this care about her. But the demon couldn't tell. He didn't want to tell the real reason. Sometimes it was better to leave something unsaid than to lie. The flames of the fire were mesmerizing. Rudis thoughtfully asked the main question. Is it possible for the demon's power to restore the city? The demigod did not answer right away. It might be difficult, but he could try. Most likely, it was within the power of the highest deity. Anything that was within his powers, the Dark One could do without any payment in return. For example, kill or destroy someone. But there was an exception for requests that went beyond these limits. For these desires, a certain price had to be paid. The princess was embarrassed. She did not want to sacrifice herself anymore. But Lavaine decided to clarify some points. After all, he didn't only take on human features. Victims were needed for the summoning. But after the transformation, things were completely different. Dark took a long time to gather his thoughts. He wanted to try to explain everything again, but he couldn't. He promised to tell everything when the time comes. But now we need to go and rest. After all, the princess is too tired. Lavaine threw a soft white cape over the girl's shoulders. The night was cold, and at dawn they had to leave this place. 10 days later, the expedition returned to the lands of the Duchy of Arctis. The gates swung open in welcome, letting in the Duke's carriage. Servants and footmen ran out to greet the winners. They vied with each other to congratulate them on their victory and express their gratitude to the princess and Mr. Seraphis. They were very happy that everyone returned home safe and sound. The Duke and the princess were in the study when the butler entered. Arian apologized for disturbing them immediately upon their arrival. But I had to report something. The butler wouldn't dare to disturb without urgent need. So something important had happened. The servants rolled in a cart with numerous gifts. Rudis looked up, uncomprehending. It seemed that all these presents were for her. The butler immediately explained everything. After the expedition left, in the first days, people showed hostility towards the princess because they thought that she had started some kind of fraudulent trick. But then something unusual happened. A guard flew into the imperial chambers, and he called on His Majesty to see it with his own eyes. He pointed towards the window. The emperor nearly fainted when he saw the scene that opened up. The western sky, which had been black all this time, became blue again. The sun had returned. That meant only one thing. The monsters were gone. Princess Rudis had gotten rid of the monsters. Now all public attention was focused on the princess. And the question of the oppression of the daughter and the bad attitude of the father came back to the fore. Now the aristocracy has completely turned towards Her Highness Princess Rudis. After all, if their only hope were to turn away, the future of the elite would be dim. There was no direct evidence of Rudis's participation in the victory over the monsters, but Count Abbot had put a lot of effort into this matter. It was safe to say that the Count was now completely on the princess's side. The butler also reported that the emperor demanded that his daughter visit the palace as soon as possible. However, no one gave the emperor an answer. After all, only Rudis could give the order to get ready for the trip. Given the current situation, the girl could not sit idly by, and she decided to go to the Imperial Palace right now. At the palace, the princess was met by Count Taba. Rudis remembered that it was this gentleman who always stood behind her father and watched him humiliate his unloved daughter. The princess could not believe that this man had been chosen to accompany her. But he had already reported that the emperor was waiting in his chambers. Rudis was amazed. After all, only those who received the emperor's special attention could visit His Majesty's private chambers. The gentleman had already been waiting for quite a long time, so he had to hurry. Having escorted the girl to her chambers, Count Taba hurried away. Father stood with his back turned when Rudis entered the chambers. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his whole posture betrayed nervous tension. Instead of greeting, the parent hissed that his daughter had finally deigned to appear, although he had been waiting for her with the dark demon, and he pointed to the sofa. Rudis was surprised to see Lavaine lounging in a frivolous pose. The girl had already wondered where the demon had disappeared to, immediately after arriving at the Duke's estate. The Duke cleared his throat and continued. He was glad that his daughter had returned safe and sound after the fight with the monsters, and that the master was very worried about his girl. Rudis saw how hard it was for her father to say these words. It seemed that public opinion and pressure from the aristocracy had forced him to change his rhetoric. The emperor revealed that he had received a full report from the daughter of the Alcester family, who had become the new ruler of those lands after her father's death at the hands of monsters. The Duke also asked his daughter if it was true that the monsters had been defeated quite easily, and not a single one of them had remained alive. The girl confirmed this. While Rudis was away, the father spoke with the high priest, and learned something about the connection between the ancient deity and his victim. The daughter did not understand why it was necessary to talk about this now. After all, the ritual had long since passed, but it seemed that the emperor had something in mind. He suddenly grabbed the girl by the shoulder and came close to her. He growled that he wanted to make Selena the victim instead of Rudis. The princess was speechless at these words. After all, she had not chosen this fate for herself. Her father had sacrificed her. And the demon on his sofa began to cough with laughter. Sacrificing the second princess was the most ridiculous idea of all. Lavaine had never met such stupid people. Greed and thirst for omnipotence made the emperor ridiculous to the demon. The emperor became furious. After all, he hadn't said anything funny, and he remembered that the supreme deity hadn't liked Rudis at first. Lavaine stopped laughing, and very seriously asked the emperor a question. Did he understand the meaning of the word sacrifice? After all, the victim dies alive, and passes on his flesh and blood. And it seems that the father did not love his second daughter, since he wished this for her. But the emperor did not agree. After all, Rudis remained alive after the ritual. The demon explained that with Rudis it was different. She had already paid a certain price. Therefore, she had no need to give her blood. The princess listened attentively to this dialogue, and she did not understand at all what price was being discussed and what she could pay. Screams were heard in Celine's bedroom. Lady Ivana's maid reported that the emperor had invited Rudis, the lady's sister, to his chambers in the palace. Princess Selena was furious. Father simply could not let this wretched woman into his chambers, and Count Taba kindly accompanied this scoundrel. The maid made it clear that the princess needed to take action immediately. Otherwise, at this rate, Princess Rudis would steal everything from her sister. The blonde beauty didn't believe it. Father would never do that. Then the maid reminded him that the emperor had once given Rudis his sister's room. She now lives in the Duchy of Arctis, next to the young duke. After all, the emperor could have planned to marry Princess Rudis to Seraphis. A cup fell to the floor, followed by other dishes. Selena was furious. There was no way she was going to give her fiancé to some bastard. Lady Ivana covered her mouth with her hand, hiding a grin. Sparkles darted in her eyes. This schemer got what she wanted. After her audience with the Emperor, Rudis leaned tiredly against the wall of the corridor. She couldn't believe that the Emperor had such a plan. He wanted to perform the sacrifice rite again, but this time, to sacrifice Princess Selena to the ancient deity. Thank the gods, this plan could not be carried out now. Suddenly, a man's hand reached out to the girl again. Of course it was Lavaine. This demon always appeared so unexpectedly. And the princess put her palm in his hand. The demon noted with mockery that people's habits change over time. In the past, a loved one was taken by the arm. The girl was surprised. Lavaine was going to accompany her personally and not disappear, as was often the case lately. But he said that he wanted to be closer to the princess, and he was afraid to hurt her again. After all, he often hid something from her. The omission was an obstacle to a trusting relationship. Yes, Rudis was a little upset about this. From the very beginning, she did not have any hopes for the demon. After all, he was not a human. The ancient deity always appeared and disappeared very unexpectedly. But now he clearly showed interest in the princess. But he was something ephemeral, like a sandcastle that could crumble. Lavaine wanted Rudis to admit that the princess trusted him, but his eyes saw otherwise. The girl did not want to rely on the demon, not for anything in the world. The man stepped back. He had no intention of pestering the princess, or accusing her of anything. He simply promised to wait. The next day, at the Duke's estate of Arctis, Rudis spoke with Sir Seraphis about future plans. The girl wanted to visit the temple before her next trip to Geheim. The young Duke immediately offered his help. He could have sent his man to the temple on an errand. One word from the princess, and the issue would have been resolved. But the girl wanted to go there personally. There was one thing that needed to be cleared up about Mr. Lavaine. I couldn't remember the words about a certain price that Rudis had paid. Because of her, she didn't have to give her blood. Seraphis immediately offered his help in escorting the princess. Or he could send a reliable guard. In the capital, many were under the influence and patronage of the emperor. After everything that had happened to the girl, the issue of security was the most important. Rudis sincerely thanked the young warrior. At noon, a carriage bearing the coat of arms of the Duke of Arctis carried the princess to the main temple of the empire. Wishes for a successful journey followed. 2 priests led Rudis into the main hall of the temple. The high priest was already waiting there. He greeted the princess warmly because they had not seen each other for a long time. The girl told the higher one about her victory over the monsters. That from one word of hers, the monsters disappeared in an instant, as if they had never existed, and she asked to shed light on the demon's destructive power. But he could not explain anything. There was no answer to this question in the ancient books. Then Rudis asked about the sacrificial rite, about what Lavaine had said about a certain fee that the princess had paid. The high priest was very surprised, but it seemed that the ancient deity spoke the truth, and these words must be taken directly. According to Mr. Lavaine, it turned out that the princess had already given her sacrifice. There had to be one. Without the sacrifice, the ritual to summon the ancient deity would have been impossible. But Rudis did not give herself as a sacrifice. However, the priest explained that the princess may not remember this, or not admit such a fact. If this was true, then it meant that the princess had killed someone else during the ritual, and it was he who became the sacrifice that was made. It was impossible. To hide the defect of her leg, the girl lived in a separate palace until she was 13, and then she was locked in the princess's chambers under strict supervision. Therefore, there was not even a chance to remain unnoticed to take someone for the sake of the ritual. Moreover, without the help of the temple, the ritual of sacrifice cannot be carried out. Now the high priest had to figure out how this could have happened. If the sacrifice had already been made, then the scope of the investigations was significantly narrowed. The priest took the princess by the hand, asked her not to worry about it, and promised that the temple would make every effort to sort out this issue. The high priest smiled. He had heard that the young duke was accompanying the girl. For greater security, he suggested taking 2 more guards. They would escort the carriage to the residence. Accompanied by the priests, Rudis left the main temple, and suddenly she saw her sister. She was waiting for her on the steps at the main entrance. The blonde beauty was very angry and insisted on an immediate conversation, right here and now. Rudis agreed to talk, but as briefly as possible, because tomorrow at dawn they had to leave for Geheim. Selena could hardly contain herself. She asked her sister why she was stopping her and not allowing her to become the second victim. Rudis smiled. The sister was herself. The capricious girl had her toy taken away. She was denied a second sacrifice. But Selena was not laughing. She could barely contain herself. Her sister wanted to completely appropriate all the power of the ancient deity. After all, the girls had one father. That means they are related by blood, and sisters should share everything with each other. Rudis was shocked. Selena had never considered her a relative, and naturally, she shared nothing with her sister. But the blonde continued, demanded that Rudis talk to that ancient deity, so that her blood sister could use his power. The princess could barely contain her incoming anger. She asked the guards to leave her for a while for a private conversation with Selena. Years of seclusion helped the girl control herself. She calmly explained that she could not do what her sister asked. It was beyond her power. The demon decided everything, and she reminded that it was the emperor who spoke about the ritual, that having become a victim, she had to die. But the obstinate one stamped her foot. After all, Rudis survived the ritual. But Selena had her own way of thinking. Because of old childhood grievances, her sister did not want to meet her halfway. She wanted to deprive her father's favorite of all privileges. Selena called everything she did to her sister, all these years, childish insults, locked her in a dark room, forced her to starve, and made fun of her injured leg. And after that, she thought that these were just harmless jokes. In fact, her sister had poisoned Rudis's life, and now she considered herself innocent. Selena didn't want to listen to anything. The imposter sister had appropriated the power that belonged to a deity, and she imagined herself to be omnipotent. But when the master disappears, Rudis will become a miserable bastard again. Then everything would fall into place, and the princess would not leave the miserable cripple alone. Selena didn't see the young duke approaching from behind. He called out to Princess Rudis and asked if she had finished her business in the temple. Selena's expression changed. There was no trace of the evil shrew left. With a naive and sweet expression, she turned to Sir Seraphis. The young duke said that he was waiting not far from the temple, but heard screams, and decided to find out what happened. Selena smiled meekly and said that the sisters were only talking to each other. It still seemed true that the sister was in love with Seraphis, which meant that she couldn't show her rotten side in his presence. Selena tried to smooth things over. Smiling, she reported to the duke that there had been a misunderstanding, and she accidentally raised her voice to her sister. Seraphis turned slightly. He asked the young lady not to make excuses. After all, he understood everything perfectly well. And he left, leaving the bride alone. The girl bit her lip in despair. This wasn't supposed to happen. This scoundrel wanted to take everything from the princess. There was only one way to fix it. Lying on her bed in her bedroom, Rudis couldn't help but remember her sister's words, that she would be herself again once the demon was gone. And it was true. Everything had its limits. If the girl had her own strength, she could defend her dignity without outside help. But the princess had nothing, so she had to find and seize a power that she could use constantly. A real power that would be a support, even if no one would lend a hand. An envoy from the emperor arrived in the Duchy of Arctus. He reported that after a meeting of the aristocrats and His Majesty, it was decided to postpone the trip to Geheim. The princess and the duke looked at each other. They couldn't believe that such a request had been made. Most likely, the emperor had insisted on it personally, but the ambassador explained the position of the assembly. They wanted to perform a second sacrifice. Regarding the repeated rite, the following was reported. Princess Selene demanded a second rite of sacrifice, and the emperor supported his daughter. The high priest was categorically against it, but the temple servants who belonged to the emperor's clan were given an order. Tomorrow they must prepare the ritual. It turned out that Selena came to the temple to plan the ritual, and the meeting with her sister was accidental. Seriphus asked whether the emperor really supported his daughter's idea. After all, he was aware of the essence of the sacrifice. But His Majesty believed that Selena would be fine, since Rudis remained safe and sound after the same ritual. Sir Seriphus clutched his head. This had to be stopped. After all, the problem would be both success and failure of the plan, because they could summon a second ancient deity. If this had happened, the situation would have changed catastrophically. After all, it would have become very difficult to resist the emperor. Then Rudis suggested that the Duke postpone the trip and go to the Imperial Palace. He needed to talk to his father. After all, he and Selena were planning a terrible thing. But it was impossible to delay the trip to Geheim for too long. After all, the situation with the monsters was getting worse every day, and the plan to destroy the monsters could collapse. First, Rudis wanted to talk to her sister. After all, her capricious stubbornness could lead to irreparable consequences. But the maid did not let the princess into Selena's room. After all, Her Highness was preparing for the sacrifice ritual, and she could not find time for the fugitive who had left the palace. Lady Ivana hated Rudis all her life, but she was close to Selene. Perhaps she should have talked to her about the terrible mistake her sister was about to make. Rudis asked the maid why she had not dissuaded Selena from such a stupid act. After all, during the ritual, the victim died, and the princess was a dear person to the companion. But Lady Ivana smirked. It seemed that Princess Rudis was afraid of losing the power of the deity and becoming a useless bastard again if a second deity appeared. Approaching the girl, the lady hissed that she would not be able to interfere with the ritual, and therefore she had to leave. The young duke was present at this conversation, and now he consulted with the princess about what to do. Rudis suggested meeting with the great priest. There was a guard at the entrance to the priest's chambers, and the footman reported that visitors could not meet with the high priest. It turned out that the high priest was placed under house arrest. After all, 2 knights were assigned to guard his chambers. The footman also reported the following: an audience with the emperor was also impossible until tomorrow's ceremony. Therefore, the visitors were asked to leave. Rudis was beside herself. She didn't know how to prevent a terrible mistake. She remembered the faces of the people who had driven her out of the palace today. They all thought that the princess wanted to interfere with the ceremony in order to remain irreplaceable and needed. They were simply out of their minds. Rudis reasoned, sitting on the bed. Selena had brought so much humiliation throughout her sister's childhood and youth, but turning away in the moment of impending danger was impossible. The girl remembered the moment when the emperor called her to the throne room. Then he announced the ritual of sacrifice, and the cynical way Selena smirked when Rudis was cast as the victim. But still, the princesses were blood relatives. The sister insisted on performing the ritual again because of her selfishness, and Rudis briefly considered letting this capricious fool die. The girl took out a carved box. It contained her most valuable piece of jewelry, a gift from her mother, a hairpin in the shape of a dragonfly with a sharp edge. If Selena had disappeared, Rudis's grief would have disappeared. However, her sister was not the only one to blame for everything that was happening to the crippled girl. The princess clutched the dragonfly hairpin in her hand. She had to save her stupid sister at any cost. Sir Seriphus decided to act on his own. He intended to convince the nobles on his behalf so that they would not be able to send him away. However, the princess did not really believe in a positive outcome of this matter. She made her decision and was already running down the stairs. Rudis went out into the night garden and approached the marble fountain. She closed her eyes for a moment and raised her head, as if she were looking at the stars, but not with her eyes, but with her soul. Taking a deep breath, the princess called upon the ancient deity. At this moment, she really needed his strength and support. Rudis repeated Lavaine's name over and over again. After all, he promised to come at any time of the day or night if she just called. But this time, he didn't come to her call. The ancient deity did not appear at the call. The princess almost cried. After all, without a higher power, she was not capable of anything. The girl kept clutching the dragonfly hairpin to her chest. Suddenly, the solution came to her, and the princess headed back to get ready for the journey. There was a great deal of activity in Selena's bedroom. The maids were bustling about, preparing the princess for the important event. Suddenly, one of the servants reported that the princess's sister was asking for a meeting again. This time, Selena graciously agreed to receive her, and Rudis entered her sister's richly furnished and decorated room. The princess was fully prepared for the sacrificial ritual. The white dress with blue bows suited her so well. Her light hair was decorated with flowers, like a living porcelain doll. Selena smiled. There was only 1 hour left until the ritual, and no sister could stop this important event from happening. Rudis knew that Selena wasn't going to listen to her. She handed the princess doll a dragonfly hair clip. The latter stood up from her seat at such impudence. The sister explained that she had worn this thing for the sacrifice ceremony, and she had been with her in that stone crypt. That's why she asked the princess to take this thing. However, Selena was angry. After all, she could not trust her sister. She could poison this thing or put some kind of curse on it. Rudis cried. She did not give up until the end, and that night she found a way to stop the ritual. However, nothing came of it. So, in despair, the girl came here, and Rudis also warned her sister. No matter what happened in the stone crypt, she must not stop fighting for her life. The princess just laughed at the words of this crazy woman. But then the maid arrived. It was time to go to the altar to perform the ritual. As she left, Selena turned around. She took this hairpin for only one purpose, so that in the repeated ritual, everything would be exactly like in the first one, so that it would be successful. The maids bowed, seeing the princess off, and Rudis looked sadly after the princess, who did not understand what she was getting into. In the throne room, everything was repeated exactly as last time. The emperor sat on the throne, and in front of him stood the princess. Only it was a different daughter. His Majesty did not hide his joy. His own blood, Princess Selene, had offered herself as a sacrifice. After all, this ritual was carried out for the good of the empire. Rudis was beside herself. Her father had no intention of performing the sacrifice again. But because of his selfishness, he was pushing his beloved daughter to certain death. Selena was also in high spirits. She folded her hands in prayer and promised to return and bring the ancient deity with her. The emperor blessed his daughter. She must return and bring happiness to the emperor and the good of the entire empire. Everyone present murmured approvingly. Only Rudis cried, and the young princess headed into the stone crypt. The father smiled, watching his favorite. The stone doors of the crypt closed. There was no way back. The priest began the ceremony. He read the text of the ritual, stumbling slightly. People brought the flesh and blood of a descendant of the noblest family among people, and they prayed to accept this high sacrifice. They conjured the ancient deity to answer the call and appear in the world of people. Suddenly, a crash and some strange sounds were heard behind the stone doors of the crypt. The guards jumped back from the door in horror. All present froze in horror. And the emperor roared like a wild beast and called to account the priest who conducted the ritual. He asked why the sounds were different from the first time, but the young priest stuttered and gave an answer. Conducting the ritual was the duty of the high priest, and the simple minister did not know all the subtleties. It was scary to look at the emperor. He was rushing around the hall with an enraged face, unable to find a place for himself, and he was spewing out wild curses. The guards offered to open the doors of the stone cave, but His Majesty did not allow it. He shouted that they had to wait. Finally, Rudis couldn't stand it any longer, and also asked her father to open the crypt. But suddenly, the heavy stone doors began to slide apart. An elegant young man with blonde hair and emerald eyes emerged from the crypt. He smiled and frivolously greeted everyone present. Rudis stood as if struck by lightning. The ancient deity was heading straight for her. Those present were speechless, and the princess had only one thought in her head. What happened to her sister, because she never came out? Selena needed to be pulled out of the crypt. Some dark fog was creeping out of the cracks and doors of the stone abyss. The guards were rushing about in panic, trying to avoid its touch. Those present were also seized by panic. Black paws of smoke were approaching them too. The first screams were heard. The fog approached Rudis too, but suddenly she heard a greeting addressed to her. It was that demon from the crypt, and the black smoke did not touch the girl. The young man seemed to recognize the princess and asked her not to worry. After all, he would not harm her. Moreover, this darkness was not too destructive. A couple of days of light nightmares, and that was all. The stranger himself invited Rudy's into the crypt. After all, she wanted to see if the victim was alive inside. But the girl was already looking for her sister in the semi-darkness. Suddenly, she saw Selena lying on the stone floor. She was covered in blood. Her beautiful white dress had turned blood red, and it seemed like the girl wasn't breathing. Rudy's ran to her sister. She grabbed her by the shoulders and tried to lift her up. It seemed that it wasn't blood. The sister tried to bring the victim back to her senses. Selena opened her eyes and tried to sit up. Only weak cries for help came out of her mouth. She begged for help. Rudy saw a hairpin in the shape of a dragonfly and took it in her hands. She screamed with all her might for someone to come to her aid and pull her sister out of this terrible place. Selena's eyes seemed to be covered with a veil. Rudy's begged her to come to her senses. They had to leave immediately. Suddenly, a spark of life flashed in the sister's eyes, and streams of tears began to flow from the princess's eyes. As if she recognized who was in front of her, Rudy's realized that there was no help coming. She knelt down and tried to lift her sister, but her sister just kept repeating her name, over and over again. Rudy's put her shoulder to the ground and almost carried Selena out of the crypt. The people present at the ceremony couldn't move a step. They were surrounded by the black smoke that had come out. The emperor perked up when he saw his beloved daughter. He knew that his girl would succeed. There was no time to waste. His Majesty turned to the demon sitting on the steps. He seemed slightly bored as he watched the black smoke envelop the noble ladies and gentlemen. The emperor had already prepared the wishes that the supreme deity had to fulfill. After all, his Selena had subdued this demon by sacrificing herself. But the young man looked at this pompous ruler with a grin. He was not going to do anything. The emperor was taken aback. After all, the ancient deity summoned last time carried out the orders of the victim who pulled him out of chaos, and used his power only for her sake. The stranger was surprised. It turned out that someone had already come to this world before him. He wondered what abilities that deity had. Rudy's looked straight at the summoned one, and told that the gentleman made the trees bloom in winter, and then, by causing the leaves to fall, he returned the trees to winter again. The demon laughed. Among his kind, it turned out, there was a romantic. But Rudy's continued. Even the ancient deity dealt with death and destruction. Now the stranger understood who he was talking about. The gentleman had chosen the name Lavaine, and it suited him very well. Then the princess plucked up her courage and asked the name of the new ancient deity. He introduced himself as Kelster, and immediately asked what the princess's name was. Rudy's couldn't understand why this demon was asking her questions, and not his victim Selena. The girl gave her name, Princess Rudy's. Kelster smiled, and said that he was on the princess's side, and having received his sacrifice, he had to work, even though he didn't really want to. The girl did not understand how the supreme deity could get a victim. After all, Selena was not dead. But the demon smiled and said that he had received his victim. From her, Princess Rudy's. It simply couldn't be. But the demon brought his lips close to her ear and whispered that it seemed that Lavaine had said the same words after the summoning ceremony. According to Kelster, Rudy's had sacrificed to 2 higher deities, and perhaps more. The demon grinned smugly. He said that the number was several hundred, although the princess might not believe it. Rudy's really didn't believe it. Perhaps the Dark One was joking, but he became serious. He was interested in some strange magic that was circling around the girl, and it would be nice to get rid of it. The princess went cold. Perhaps that was why Lavaine had not heard her call for help. She wondered how black magic could have gotten on her, and she remembered how Lady Ivana came close to the princess and put her hand on her shoulder. At the same time, as if by accident, she muttered something. Then the emperor approached the young people and addressed the deity. The victim who had summoned the Lord was his daughter Selena, and the ruler demanded that the demon speak to her. The demon glanced at the bloody, pathetic princess on the floor and ordered to be escorted to his proper quarters. Selena raised her tearful eyes, and she called upon the Lord's supreme deity. But he noted with disdain that he was amazed at the people. Such a non-entity was going to be given to him as a sacrifice. The emperor rushed after the departing Mr. Kelster. He was glad that everything had worked out so well, and now no monsters were scary. Sir Seriphus came to Selena's aid. She was trying to get up from the floor, and the young man supported the bloody and pitiful former beauty. The carriage brought the girl, tired from today's experiences, to the Arctis estate. The footman offered his hand, and Rudis descended the steps. And then I saw Levane. He seemed scared. He immediately asked if everything was okay. It was the first time the princess had seen the demon from such a side, as if he were a sensual romantic, not an ancient deity. And she told about Lady Ivana's trick. Levane was upset to learn that a dark curse had prevented him from hearing the princess's call. It seemed that humans could go too far in their base feelings. Rudis also told about the sacrifice ceremony. The demon asked who exactly she had managed to summon. I didn't think it was Kelster. It seemed like the two of them knew each other. Levane saw that the princess had some question for him, but she did not dare to ask it. Perhaps she was even frightened by it. But Rudis made up her mind. She asked for clarification on some issues. About the fact that Mr. Kelster received the sacrifice from her. Levane immediately confirmed it. The princess had sacrificed to this demon as well. Rudis was about to say something else. Tears rolled down her eyes from helplessness, but the demon put his hand on her eyes, as if to calm the girl down. She didn't need to know about it, and she didn't need to think about all this. Rudis assumed she had taken hundreds of lives, if what Kelster had said was true. But Levane had asked the princess not to get close to the Dark One. He recommended entrusting this demon to his sister, and it didn't matter that Kelster might not listen to the second princess. And Levane also explained the following. The abilities of the second supreme deity could not be used to destroy monsters, and those who summoned him would soon understand everything. Levane promised that no magic would stop him now, and he would come at any time of the day or night. The demon lightly touched the girl's forehead with his lips, and asked the princess to always keep his image in her head. The emperor's residence was already in full swing discussing the events of that day. That a second ancient deity had appeared. Although the aristocrats who were at the ceremony could not explain anything, the maids gossiped that Princess Selene was the official sacrifice, and her supreme deity was the most powerful, which meant it was now a matter of time before the monsters were defeated. The official notification arrived at the Arctis residence almost immediately. Sir Seriphus was indignant. The emperor demanded that the trip to Geheim be postponed indefinitely. Princess Selene needed to get used to the new supreme deity. The girl was very weak after the ceremony, and it took a long time to recover. Seriphus said that the aristocrats were animatedly discussing the ceremony of summoning a new supreme deity, and all hopes were directed towards Princess Selena. Rudis thought about it. After all, her sister couldn't give orders to an ancient deity. She couldn't even imagine what was happening in the Imperial Palace right now. In her chambers, Princess Selene knelt. Again and again she called upon the ancient deity. That Lord Kelster would come to her at least once. The usual scene repeated itself. The father scolded his unloved daughter, that she was born defective, and only brought shame on him. Selena smiled stupidly. She couldn't understand what her father was talking about now. Most likely, the emperor meant Rudis. The princess tried to get up, but as soon as she put her weight on her leg, she immediately screamed from the sharp pain. The leg was absolutely black. The maid who ran up caught the girl, not letting her fall. She asked His Majesty to come to his senses. After all, his favorite was in front of him. But the princess still couldn't stay on one leg and fell to the floor. The maid began to fuss. It was urgent to call a doctor. The carriage bearing the Duke of Arctis's coat of arms was leaving the Duke's residence. Sir Seriphus was discussing the trip to Geheim with Rudis. After all, the emperor could postpone it indefinitely. His Majesty had been postponing the date for 3 days already, but there was a limit to everything, and no amount of greed could force him to drag out the time any longer. But Rudis assumed that the capital's aristocrats now saw the situation with the monsters differently, and no longer considered it so critical. Seriphus agreed. After all, none of these people had ever encountered monsters. They might think that the problem had already been solved, and switched to using this issue for political purposes. The princess remembered the conversation with Levane, how he said that the new demon did not have the ability to destroy monsters. but it seemed that no one else knew about it. An elegant young man bowed to greet the Duke and Princess. His hair was the color of burgundy wine. It was Count Abbott. Rudis was surprised, because it was always Count Taba who occupied this place. But the man who entered explained that the Count, together with the other ministers, was now in the residence where Mr. Kelster was staying. These nobles had a very important mission. They were asking the ancient deity to recognize Princess Selina. Rudis resolutely said that she must immediately go to Kelster's residence and talk to the ministers. After all, they were in the dark about the new demon. Earl Abbott volunteered to accompany the princess. She trusted him completely. After all, he was the only one who supported her in voting for the trip to Vignoud. It was true that Rudis did not understand why the Count was helping her. After all, the county of Abbott and its entire family were part of the imperial clan. The hubbub died down for a few seconds when Princess Rudis, accompanied by the Count, appeared at the ministerial meeting. No one understood what Her Highness was doing there. The girl looked in surprise at the strange scene that was happening in the forum hall. Princess Selina was sitting on the floor. She was barely breathing, and the father was rushing around his daughter. He shouted strange words, so that Selina would try again and nevertheless summon the ancient deity. The maids begged His Majesty to have mercy on the princess. The emperor asked his daughter why she was unable to do anything. After all, no matter how much she called out to him, Lord Kelster did not even leave his palace. No matter how hard the maids tried to persuade the emperor to soften, he stood his ground. He was furious and almost shouted at Selina. He accused his daughter of having forgotten how to speak, since she could not summon the deity. But then the parent saw his second daughter. He did not remember calling her to the palace. He suggested leaving for his place of residence, the Duchy of Arctis. But the girl seemed not to hear these cruel words. She only said that the trip to Geheim could not be postponed any longer. Otherwise, the situation could get out of control. The emperor grinned evilly. It turned out that Rudis had found out that her sister could not cope with the summoning, and she thought that the time had come to put pressure on her father. It was strange that the emperor saw things that way. Rudis wanted to save people, and His Majesty, it seemed, didn't care about his subjects. He was interested in one thing: the desire to gain power. But the ruler did not agree with this. He thought more than anyone about protecting the empire. The forces had to achieve balance. Otherwise, a catastrophe awaited. That is why he gave the order to conduct the second rite. Rudis saw that her father was lying when he spoke of sympathy for his subjects. But since he spoke of defending the empire, she decided to catch him in his words. She suggested that she go to Geheim, and Kelster to another place. But looking at the emperor, the princess suddenly realized something important. He wanted to gain power not for the sake of defeating monsters, but for himself. Suddenly there was a noise. While everyone was wondering where it was coming from, Mr. Kelster appeared in the hall. He was sitting on a dais, crossing his legs, and it seemed he was enjoying the show. Princess Selina tried to stand up. The maids supported her by the arms. She uttered the name of the ancient deity with her last strength. Finally, her call was crowned with success, but the demon gestured to the girl to her place on the floor, and grimacing, he ordered her to remain in her place and not to approach him. The emperor raised his hand and demanded that the wish be fulfilled. After all, the supreme deity had been summoned precisely for this. The empire needed help to destroy the monsters. The green-eyed blonde smirked. These humans were wrong. He didn't have the strength to stand up to the monsters like Levane. The power that was given to Mr. Kelster was the exact opposite. This supreme deity wielded the power of healing and birth. The emperor, who had dropped his hands, regained his spirit. So this demon did have power after all. Then the supreme deity had to tell him what he could do, what wish to fulfill. Kelster chuckled. He could do many things. For example, give a person strength. But the ruler had absolutely nothing to do with it. The demon turned to Princess Rudis and smiled at her. He raised his hand towards the girl and offered to choose the power she wanted to receive. The choice was hers. Rudis seemed to find herself in a place where there were only two people, the girl and the demon. He let only her into his world. After all, silence was the most beautiful thing in the world. Kelster warned of bad consequences. In the event that the truth was revealed, that the princess was now under the control of two demons, and the girl was confused. But the supreme deity looked straight into the princess's soul with his emerald eyes. He asked again about the power that Princess Rudis wanted to obtain. To help the girl get her bearings, the demon began listing his abilities. He could make flowers bloom in a lifeless desert, or rejuvenate someone who was dying. The demon had many stupid and absurd desires, everything related to rebirth and restoration, and Rudis had to choose what she wanted. It was the most difficult question in her life. Before, the girl had wanted nothing, or rather, she had not dared to want anything. Until now, the princess did not understand what she wanted most in the world. And suddenly, the girl remembered the faces of people saved from zombies. They found hope. But how many died at the clutches of monsters? And Rudis understood what she wanted to do. The princess knew what she wanted at that moment: to save the people who suffered from the monsters. And that had to be her power. The supreme deity raised his hand. The emerald eyes seemed to smile. Lord Kelster said something and placed his hand on the princess's shoulder. Suddenly, some bright glow in the form of runes appeared around the girl, and the blue ligature of the magic circle wrapped around her neck. Kelster came close and seemed to kiss the girl on the neck, but she felt teeth on her neck that tasted her blood, right in the place where the magic sign was now glowing. The demon stepped back and smiled mysteriously, and informed the shocked princess that she had made her sacrifice. It seemed as if time had stopped in the forum room. Those present held their breath. But as soon as Rudis came to her senses, everyone perked up. The emperor and the aristocrats did not take their eyes off Her Highness, and a silent question was in every pair of eyes present. Without understanding what was happening, the girl looked up and saw Lavaine standing right behind her, and he was very serious. The two supreme deities stood opposite each other, glaring at each other. Kelster finally broke the silence. He was surprised at the human form Lavaine had taken, but the first supreme deity showed character and advised to shut the mouth of the second. Kelster retreated slightly. He did not want to quarrel. The blonde put his arm around the princess's shoulders and quipped that Lavaine had only shown the girl his good side. Lightning flashed in the dark man's eyes, and a moment later, he jumped up to Kelster and grabbed the impudent fellow by the arms. But the green-eyed blonde seemed to be enjoying himself. Dark smoke crawled across the forum hall. Its tentacles reached every person present. People began to guess the nightmares they had been having for several days in a row. Lavaine was furious. This scoundrel was doing the impossible. Demons took an oath to exist in the human world, and everyone took that oath. But this blonde guy with a grin declared that he simply received a victim in exchange for his help. But Lavaine understood that he wanted to take everything for himself. Rudis watched the two demons engage in a verbal duel. It was the first time she had seen her Dark One in such a state. He was beside himself, 100%. And then Kelster realized something. It seemed that Lavaine had special feelings for his victim, and the blonde man said so sarcastically. The hand that held his hand squeezed with incredible force, and blood began to flow down the blonde's hand. He screamed, but Lavaine had already turned away from the impudent man. With a familiar gesture, the gentleman extended his hand to the princess. This scene was repeated again, and Rudis became alarmed again. This demon showed some special care for her, and the motive for this was unclear. Rudis placed her hand in his, but this time Lavaine pressed it to his cheek. After standing for a while, he embraced the beauty and called her to follow him. The princess found herself in a crystal-white space, where there was only her and her shadow. The demon was nowhere to be found, even though Rudis was calling him. Suddenly, the girl's attention was drawn to a very elegant mother-of-pearl box, trimmed with gold. It seemed to float in the air. Rudis approached. Curiosity was visible in her purple eyes. On one side of the box, Rudis saw a pendant. It was a dark blue bow pendant, and it belonged to Lavaine. And then the girl heard his voice. As always, the demon appeared out of nowhere, and completely unexpectedly. Of course, the princess wanted to know where she had ended up. What was this snow-white place? And the supreme deity answered very simply, "This is the place where he lives." Lavaine explained that this space was created by his powers. This place was very similar to Kelster's darkness, but it was the opposite. The princess asked the demon about the box, but he probably decided to explain something else for now, or he dodged the question. The High One asked for forgiveness for leaving the girl alone, in confusion. He didn't think Kelster would take advantage of that. The demon really didn't want the princess to be near this demon. And one more thing. The demon asked about power. Did Kelster grant her power? At the same time, the ancient deity's face was very serious. Rudis was scared. It seemed she shouldn't have received this gift from the second demon. She was afraid that now she would have to sacrifice someone else. But Levane explained that the ancient deities did not dare to deceive people because of the oath they took. The demons simply wanted the girl not to get involved with other ancient deities except him. Levane wanted to give her everything himself, everything the princess wanted, her dreams, and her deepest desires. The demon wanted to fulfill for his Rudis himself, to release her soul from the confinement in which she had lived her entire life. But the girl didn't want to rely on anyone. She was humiliated and deceived by the people closest to her. All her life she wanted at least a drop of love, but she received only coldness and violence. However, now I decided that I had to rely only on myself, and not rely on anyone else. If she were betrayed or deceived again, the princess would not be able to rise again. Rudis cried, and these were the bitterest tears. Tears of resentment and betrayal. The ancient deity was also upset, and asked for forgiveness for his willfulness. But he did not know how to console the upset lady. Rudis asked for an explanation of something. She had read many books about summoning rituals, but there was no mention of the length of stay of ancient deities in the human world. The princess was afraid of one thing, that when she made a real wish, the demon would disappear. That is, he would go to his world, fulfilling her will. She begged him to answer that the supreme deity, Mr. Levane, would remain nearby. After all, something could have been thought of. Levane replied that he existed only to fulfill her will, and when he fulfilled her wish, the ancient deity would disappear. The emperor was indignant. Both the summoned deities and his daughter Rudis never returned after their disappearance. It was as if they had evaporated. But then the butler entered. He reported that Princess Rudis had returned to the Arctis estate. There was also news that Her Highness was planning to leave for Geheim tomorrow. This was contrary to the emperor's plans. After all, it had not been possible to achieve the submission of the second deity, and Rudis could bring good news from Geheim. And then the people would turn away from the government. But the trip could not be delayed any longer. The situation could get out of control, and His Majesty ordered Selena to be brought immediately. Rumors that the princess was also going to Geheim reached the Arctis estate. Everyone saw that Selena had failed to establish contact with Kelster. However, the father put pressure on his daughter. Sir Seraphis reasoned that His Majesty had been hasty in announcing that Princess Selene was capable of controlling the ancient deity, and the aristocrats had given their consent. It turned out that the emperor simply wanted to share the achievements in case of a successful trip. Selena was not going on this trip of her own free will. After all, she had rarely even left the house before. The young duke also reported that Princess Selene was to travel accompanied by His Majesty's expeditionary detachment, which would join Rudis's crew on the way. Seraphis left, wishing good night to the princess. The girl remained alone in the bedroom. She was very worried about tomorrow's trip, and one more thing was bothering her. What kind of skill had Kelster given her? And one more thing. If Selena was going, then the second highest deity should have accompanied her on her journey. But suddenly, Rudis heard a negative answer. Levane seemed to materialize out of nowhere. He confirmed that Kelster was not going to Geheim. The second demon had already granted Rudis's wish. Therefore, it would be difficult for him to appear in the human world. And if Rudis's wish really came true, he would disappear in a couple of months. The girl became sad. If her deepest wish came true, Mr. Levane would also disappear. The demon tried to calm the girl down and reached out to wipe away the tears that were streaming from her purple eyes. But the princess pulled away. It seemed that she did not want the supreme deity, Lord Levane, to approach her. But the princess only silently shed tears. And the demon did not dare to ask anything. 15 days later, after a long journey, Princess Selene stepped out of the imperial carriage and set foot on the soil of the Duchy of Geheim. The princess was surprised to see a strange picture. The sky was an unusual bright burgundy color, and everything around seemed to be covered with red dust. In a small courtyard, there were supply trains and tents for the soldiers. This was the temporary location of the defenders of Geheim. Princess Rudis also got out of her carriage. Unfortunately, the scene that opened up was familiar to the girl. Mr. Levane was already kindly extending his hand. The girl remembered how she had involuntarily forbidden the demon to come near her. And now he was behaving very delicately. One of the defenders of Geheim approached the young duke. He asked about the small number of reinforcements sent. It turned out that the emperor's family did not respect the guards of the empire. Suddenly, one of the guards ran up to the commander. He shouted that a mutated resident had appeared. Everyone needed to evacuate. Rudis didn't immediately understand what was happening, but then she realized something terrible. It meant that the monsters had begun a ritual to transform people into their own kind. Panic broke out among the people in the square. Some screamed and rushed about, not knowing how to escape the horror. Some froze in place, as if paralyzed. Princess Selene stepped out from behind the guard. She hoped to see what had happened, and why people were shouting and fussing so much. Suddenly, everyone saw a huge brown beast. Instead of a muzzle, there was a huge red eye with a black vertical pupil, and on top of it, a human face with empty eye sockets. Selena felt sick, and the guards tried to come to their senses. The commander ordered to prepare the crossbows and to aim at the monster. But suddenly, a woman ran forward. She blocked the crossbowmen's way. She begged them not to shoot. After all, she was her daughter. The guards tried to convince the madam that it was no longer her daughter. The monster had swallowed the unfortunate girl, but the mother could not believe it. Princess Selene was in a semi-conscious state. She could not comprehend that the monster was intertwined with a human body. The girl's mother stood in defense of her child. The guards shouted that they could open fire on her if she did not move away. After all, the people in the shelter were in danger. Suddenly, the monster made a sound similar to the word mama, and the woman perked up. She believed that her girl had not yet completely turned into a monster. The commander began to lose patience. He ordered the crossbowmen to aim at the monster, but Rudy stood behind the unfortunate mother, who was kneeling. Sir Seraphis rushed towards the princess. This could be very dangerous. The monster could harm her highness. But Levane put his hand on his shoulder, stopping the warrior. The ancient deity had been given different knowledge than any mortal, and he understood better than anyone else what was happening now. And what would happen? Princess Rudy seemed to have fallen into some kind of trance. Her purple eyes seemed to be looking inward. The magic circle on her neck began to glow brightly. Streams of blue light began to break from her fingers, and the girl directed them. To the left, then up the stairs, circling the monster. Everything became clear in her head. The princess knew what she had to do. Where the blue glow met the red fog, there was a hissing sound, and the smoke retreated. People watched, as if enchanted, as the princess raised her hands, surrounded by an unearthly blue light. And the streams of light seemed to await her orders. The unfortunate mother begged for mercy for her child. She believed that her daughter was still human. She spread her arms wide, as if covering the monster with her body. Without a word, the princess informed Levane that this was the power she had received. She stood in the center of the runic blue glow, like a young goddess. Suddenly, Rudis directed blue streams of light straight at the monster, right where the only eye glowed scarlet. The monster screamed wildly. The princess did not lower her hands. A second later, a huge column of red light flew into the sky, exactly where the monster had just stood. The little girl seemed to materialize out of nowhere, right where the red pillar of flame had just been. She seemed to hang in the air. The child was crying and screaming, but then the girl began to fall straight into her mother's arms. She couldn't believe such happiness. She just held her child tightly to herself. Finally, Rudis lowered her hands. She felt utterly devastated, but also great relief that the girl had been rescued from the clutches of the monster. The warriors who were closest to the scene began to shout that a miracle had happened. But suddenly, they were interrupted by a loud voice. It asked about the appearance of the mutated inhabitant. A gray-haired man stepped forward. It was Duke Dulis Arctus, Serifus' grandfather, who had hurried to join the defenders' convoy as soon as he learned of the monster's capture of a small child. The guards and warriors began to tell each other about the miracle that had happened before their eyes. The Duke was extremely surprised, and he thought that his subordinates were embellishing the story. He heard that the summoning ritual was successful, but he did not expect such a result. Sir Dulis turned to the princess to confirm her skills in curing mutated people. The princess confirmed this, and said that she would save Geheim with the help of the ancient deity, Lord Levane. Serifus confirmed her words with enthusiasm. He told his grandfather that he had seen everything with his own eyes. The princess, using the power of a deity, defeated the monsters in an instant. Sir Dulis said that there were already several hundred people who had undergone mutation. The ritual of monsters had begun some time ago. It was necessary to hurry with the rescue of the converted. The Duke turned to the princess about the possibility of curing everyone. Rudis doubted. After all, it had only happened once, and she was not sure of the success of the next attempts. But the ancient deity standing next to her only nodded silently, and the princess said that she could do it and was ready to begin. She concentrated and gave the demon a clear order. The princess wanted the Dark One to destroy all the monsters that would be in his way, and Levane confirmed that the wish would be fulfilled. Rudis, accompanied by the demon, headed towards the gates beyond which the Red Hell began. Their companions were both Dukes of Arctus. Sir Dulis doubted his ability to destroy monsters without weapons, but his grandson promised that his grandfather would soon get used to the existence of such power. As Rudis approached the gate, she saw slime on the ground and thought about it. It was exactly the same slime as when she ran into the stone crypt. Princess Selena was covered in this bloody substance. The girl stopped for a second, looking at the horrible but familiar picture. The same red smoke enveloped everything around. Blood and mucus covered the objects. She was tormented by the question about this slime. It turned out that the monster's tracks were similar to the tracks in the crypt, but there was only a summoned deity there. But Levane had already raised his hands, and the yellow mist began to spread, trying to reach the dark entities. Suddenly, Serifus shouted that there were many monsters ahead, with people swallowed up. The princess had to retreat immediately. Hundreds of red-eyed monsters writhed on the ground, and the human faces on their heads groaned and screamed. Rudis took a step forward. The young duke tried to stop the princess. After only one release, the princess felt ill. She simply could not withstand such a quantity, but Her Highness would not listen to anything. People still needed to be saved. Levane supported the young warrior. Rudis would suffer great pain from such a number of people, but Mr. Levane knew that it would be impossible to dissuade the stubborn woman. Even though Sir Serifus tried to prevent the princess from harming herself, but a magic circle had already begun to glow around the girl's neck. The entire mass of human monsters howled. This howl could be heard even beyond the castle walls. The princess put her hands forward, and the magic outline began to expand. A blue glow with ancient runes on it headed towards the monsters. Suddenly, the closest shapeless mass to Rudis became a young man. He looked at his hands in surprise. He couldn't believe that his body was okay. The princess held the magic shield in her hands, but her strength was running out, and her consciousness was beginning to drift away. At this rate, it was impossible to free everyone. Sir Serifus rushed to the princess. He stretched out his arms, trying to catch the girl. The ritual had to be stopped immediately, but lightning flashed in her purple eyes. There was a storm raging there, trying to get out. Blue flames engulfed the girl so that her hair fluttered as if during a storm. Serifus, his grandfather, and Mr. Levane barely managed to stay on their feet. The last thing the princess heard was someone calling her name. Levane managed to catch the princess before she fell unconscious. Rudis saw in her fading consciousness the men bending over her. Serifus was saying something to Her Highness. But gradually, the darkness replaced everything around, and the girl finally fell into the darkness. The pain spread through the body like hot streams of lava. Every cell was burning with fire. The arms and legs felt like they were bound with fiery barbed wire. Consciousness gradually returned, and with it, the understanding that this was the price to pay for saving people, and the princess was left alone with this pain. Sir Seraphis, who supported her, Mr. Levane, who cared so much, they all abandoned the unfortunate woman. And she needed help so much. Right here and now. The girl begged someone to come to her aid, to give her at least a small sip of water. Suddenly, the saving drops fell on her dry lips. Life-giving streams of moisture filled the suffering body, and someone's caring hands supported the head. At the same time, a familiar voice asked not to hurry. The princess tried to understand who this man was. Incredible care shone through in every gesture. Suddenly, Rudis understood. It could only be one person, Levane. The girl opened her eyes. She was lying in a soft bed. The summoned demon was standing at a distance, holding a cup of water in his hands. He assured that he would not approach the princess without her consent, so that the princess would not feel uncomfortable. Thirst overcame the girl with renewed vigor, and she asked for another glass of water. Levane immediately handed over a filled glass. Rudis reached out to take the water, and her fingers briefly brushed against his hand, holding the full glass. The girl felt as if she had been struck by electricity. A sharp pain made her pull her hand back, and water splashed onto Mr. Levane's shirt. Immediately, the voices of her father and sister sounded in her memory. All her life, loved ones had reproached the girl for her clumsiness, as if she couldn't do anything properly. Tears of resentment immediately rolled down her cheeks, and Rudis began to apologize fervently for her inappropriate behavior and her own clumsiness. But Levane asked the girl to calm down in a very calm voice, and he reassuringly noted that nothing terrible had happened. It wasn't worth enduring everything alone. Levane asked to rely on him. After all, the ancient deity existed for the sake of his Rudis. But the girl could not do this. The demon could not understand why the girl drove him away. But the answer was simple. The princess was afraid that one day Levane would leave her. She also explained that when this happens, she will be left completely alone, and there will be no one to rely on. And this was the most frightening thing. Levane was shocked. Rudis had got it all wrong. He was supposed to leave only when she was better, and the demon had fulfilled her deepest desire. But the girl didn't want anything. After all, the supreme deity would leave anyway. That's why Rudis asked not to show her false kindness and care. Dark stared at the girl for a few seconds, without blinking. Then he silently turned around and left the bedroom. Princess Celine was staying in a camp tent in the camp before the gates of Geheim. The Imperial guards were constantly on duty outside the tent. The girl was indignant. No one paid attention to the princess. They even ignored the beauty. Everyone groveled only before her sister. But Rudis disappeared somewhere. She announced important matters and disappeared. After the second sacrifice, she began to behave very willfully. Selena thought about it. She didn't remember much about what had happened in the stone crypt. It seemed that the princess had fainted. Selena only remembered Rudis's frightened face next to her unconscious face. The girl leaned over her sister and begged her to wake up. But there was someone else in that stone cave. Only now did the princess understand this very clearly. But she just couldn't remember who it could be. Rudis decided to be alone to clear her head. To do this, she decided to walk in the moonlight, in the silence of the night. Levane's words about leaving after fulfilling the princess's deepest desire couldn't leave her head. That's why Rudis didn't want to get closer to the demon. After all, parting is painful. However, the girl was very worried that she could offend Mr. Levane. He showed great care, treated her, sitting at the patient's bedside. And he treated her so tenderly. So, Rudis decided to apologize. However, she didn't know if the ancient deity would want to see the girl. But as soon as she thought about Levane, a familiar voice called out from the darkness. The demon appeared the moment the princess thought of him. In a dark cloak with a blue brooch framed in gold, he looked like a true deity. And Rudis smiled. There was a lively conversation going on in Duke Arctus's camp tent. Sir Dulio admitted that he had initially been skeptical of the stories about the ancient deity. But it all turned out to be true. His grandson said that even the high priest confirmed the authenticity of the summoned god. Therefore, it was not a fake. But the Duke did not accuse the supreme deity of deception. He told that, long ago, before the birth of his grandson, Sir Dulio had traveled to the Ivana family's duchy. It was a military expedition. Then the young man met the previous Duke of Ivana. He was a weak man who was burdened by his duties. Unlike the current Duke of Ivana, who had his eye on the throne, the old Duke then showed Sir Dulio the Alpha. This mysterious document was passed down from generation to generation, in secret only within the Duchy of Ivana. There were secret facts about the ancient deities written there. The document contained information about the true power of the summoned deities. As far as Seraphis knew, the ancient deity granted a wish in exchange for a sacrifice. However, his grandfather chuckled. This was only true in general terms. The summoned deity became one with the soul of its summoner. And the longer he was in this world, the more he grew together with it. The more sensitive he became to the wishes of the summoner, and he fulfilled any request of his master until he expressed his main desire. Sir Seraphis knew that the princess's greatest wish was to save the empire. She had spoken of it herself, so, until then, Lavaine would fulfill all her requests. Then the grandfather asked his grandson if he had seen with his own eyes how exactly the princess asked the demon to fulfill her requests. The young man thought about it. Sir Dulio continued, "Now Princess Rudis is advocating for the salvation of this world, but good wishes may come to an end someday. After all, a person could not always wish only good." The young man defended Her Highness. She was not one of those who could change so drastically. Despite the humiliation directed at her, Rudis showed favor to other people. The old gentleman had a general idea of how the emperor treated his daughter, and Duke Arctus pretended not to know about it. After all, it could lead to a political war. If the duke wanted to save the princess, the Arctus duchy would become a family that was part of a clan that was opposed to the emperor's, and the princess could hate the duke, the one who sheltered her and gave her protection. If she learned the truth that Arctus knew the truth about her father's abuse all this time, suddenly it dawned on Seraphis. After all, even such a fleeting dark desire of his mistress could be fulfilled by the ancient deity. All this time, the princess was kind to others and did everything they asked. At the same time, she adhered to sound thoughts for the good of people. However, a person who had been abused for a long time could not remain innocent at heart. It was not normal, and such kindness could quickly evaporate. Princess Rudis was walking in the old park with the demon. Suddenly, Lavaine said that now they could walk calmly, without interference. The girl was amazed. After all, she hadn't said a word. But it was uncomfortable to walk along the tree roots. In the darkness, her feet caught on them, and Lavaine fulfilled her request without words. Finally, the girl decided to apologize for the words she had spoken recently. But Lavaine assured her that it was not worth worrying about, and Rudis realized that he did not hate her. The princess sighed heavily. If they had met earlier, as man and woman, everything might have been different. But they were an ancient deity and a victim. Mr. Lavaine said that during both the first and second rites, the princess had already made a sacrifice. And Rudis asked to explain what these words meant, and the demon agreed to answer all the questions. The girl had made a sacrifice in the past, which she did not remember. Rudis assumed that she had killed someone then, and the demon confirmed it. The princess began to sob. Someone had lost his life because of her. She begged him to name him, but the ancient deity only shook his head. Lavaine could not say this. The princess cried and begged him to reveal this secret to her, but the demon only embraced the upset girl. If the supreme deity were to name the one she had killed, the princess would be in dire danger. She was already having a hard time. People sometimes went crazy from the mere fact that they had made a sacrifice. Their minds could not accept what they did not understand, and the Dark One couldn't stand it. He had no desire to see it. Lavaine kept holding the girl close. His embrace was so soothing. The emperor listened to Sir Abbott's report. He reported that a message had arrived from the Duchy of Arctus. All the monsters had been destroyed, and work had already begun to restore the city. His Majesty blossomed into a benevolent smile. All this, of course, happened thanks to Selena. Count Abbott became embarrassed, but he continued reporting that there was one more piece of news. True, it did not concern Princess Selene. The young man hesitated slightly, not knowing His Majesty's reaction. Princess Rudis saved a large number of people. She rescued them from the clutches of monsters who performed the ritual of absorption. This happened thanks to her new power. His Highness the Princess returned the inhabitants, who had turned into monsters, back to human form. All the people were alive and felt normal. Sir Abbot saw the contortion on His Majesty's face, although he pretended to be happy for the people of Geheim. After all, the people who survived, thanks to Rudis, would stand by her side. In Vigneaux, there were few survivors, and this process went unnoticed. In Geheim, everything was different, especially since it was a large city and an important military strategic point. Therefore, the loyalty of this city meant a lot. After all, Princess Rudis could get not just support there, but a force capable of opposing the Emperor. As long as the Empire was calm, the Emperor's image was not threatened. But when the monsters attacked, he began to be associated with the ruler who allowed the tragedy to happen. The ruler thought only of filling the vault with gold, even when Vigneaux was approaching the end. Everything was only for his own benefit. He also spat on the Arctis Duchy, which was the Empire's sword. After all, the Arctis family was losing its best members for the sake of duty, and the Emperor was afraid to enter the battle. He was just a coward who cared only about his own power. The Count reasoned that with such a ruler, the Empire would collapse, and rebellious thoughts filled his head. That was why Sir Abbot supported Princess Rudis at that meeting of the nobles. After all, everyone was insisting on going to Harda only because of the nobles' money. The Emperor sat at his desk in his study. There was much to think about. Everything had gone wrong, and he needed to remember when it all happened. Suddenly, the Emperor remembered how the priest reported about the ancient deity, that he was not quite real, that is, a demigod, and the princess could not use his full power. That priest deceived the Emperor. Because of the lie about not fully using the power, the ruler made an unforgivable mistake. The Lord summoned Count Taboo to him and ordered him to bring lists of all the priests and maids who had access to visit the imperial family. And he immediately left to carry out the order. Lady Ivana's maid reported on the order the Emperor had given to Lord Taba. The lists had been handed over, and the ruler was already studying them. The assistant doubted whether everything would be all right, but Lady Ivana was sure that there should be no problems, and it was necessary to continue to act according to the plan. Giselle's assistant asked for clarification. After all, the goal was to curtail the power of the Emperor and the princesses. However, Princess Celine was able to summon a second ancient deity, and Princess Rudis has a huge number of followers after defeating the monsters. That is, the power of the imperial family has only increased, but the lady only smiled slyly. The higher the sandcastle was, the easier it was to collapse, especially if the wave that would destroy it was high. The main thing was that no traces were left. Giselle was very worried. The Emperor could get to her. After all, it was the servant who pretended to be a priest and provided false information. Then Lady Ivana could also suffer. The lady laughed and advised the maid to watch more carefully. The Emperor would willingly give his life to Lady Ivana. The heiress of the Ivana family entered His Majesty's private office. The Emperor raised his heavy gaze. It was clear that recent events had exhausted him. The ruler asked what brought the lady to him. At breakfast in the residence, Arctis, Rudis, and Seraphis were leisurely discussing current affairs. But the butler reported that there was urgent news from the palace. The Emperor was calling a meeting to decide on the next destination. The matter could not be delayed. The princess was delighted, so good rumors about the victory over the monsters reached the palace. After all, the more successful the trips were, the safer the situation in the Empire became. Although such haste was suspicious, Rudis wondered if there were any strange or suspicious moments in all this. The butler thought for a moment. What was unusual was that the meeting was not to take place in the imperial residence, but in a palace by the lake. Sir Seraphis was also surprised. After all, this palace was used by the Emperor's family as a place for rest and entertainment. Rudis thought about it. It seemed that the Emperor had something in mind against her. She had to think through all possible options, but the young duke reassured the princess. After all, he would be there, so nothing bad could happen. Besides, the grandfather planned to arrive in 2 weeks. After all, the princess was the only benefactor who saved the knights of Duke Dulio fighting in Geheim. The Duchy of Arctis was ready to do anything for His Highness. The seats at the council table were almost full. Everyone was waiting for the Emperor. Rudy sat at the head of the table. Sir Seraphis took the guard's place behind her. The young duke noticed that the princess was worried about something. When the girl left the palace, it was winter, and her defect was not noticeable to the higher lords. Now, under the thin clothes, the crippled leg was clearly visible. Previously, the princess draped her leg with thick fabric. Now she was afraid of unwanted glances and that someone would find out about the princess's inferiority. Suddenly, the butler announced that His Majesty the Emperor had arrived at the meeting. Everyone turned their heads toward the door, and surprised exclamations escaped from some lips. The gentleman entered accompanied by Princess Selena. She did not seem very happy to be there. The princess looked depressed and somewhat pitiful. The emperor sat down at his rightful place at the head of the table. Selene sat next to him, her head bowed. The master began the meeting to choose the next place for the expedition. The ministers took turns to pronounce the name of the Harta. After all, the last time it was cancelled in favor of Geheim. There was already growing discontent that the government was slow in providing assistance. All those present supported this proposal. After all, Harta paid a huge amount of taxes to the treasury every year. Rudis raised her hand. She was against giving priority to the dukedom of Hart. This was not the stubbornness of a capricious princess. There were reasons for that. The ministers reported that a month had passed since the last expedition. That was also when the last letter from Harta came. The situation could have changed dramatically during this period. Sir Seraphis and Rudis exchanged glances. It turned out that the ruling wing was not aware of the current situation. Information from the battlefield simply did not interest the ministers. The entire burden of the war was on the warriors of Arctis. Sir Seraphis stepped forward and reported that the situation in Hart had indeed changed in the past month. The Knights of Arctis reported directly from the battlefield that as soon as the monsters of Geheim were destroyed, the monsters of Harta immediately fled beyond the capital. The emperor could not believe his ears. The Duke of Arctis continued. As soon as the monsters retreated from the outskirts of Vignode, the remaining monsters left all the cities almost simultaneously. The emperor was taken aback. The ministers were also worried. The young duke's words meant that the monsters had one special feature: to communicate at a distance. Those present clutched their heads because of the monsters' telepathic abilities. After all, people had been trying to develop this skill for several decades. Sir Seraphis reported that the monsters' technical skills were much higher than those of humans. The same was true of their intelligence. But for now, the strategic initiative had slipped out of the monsters' hands. Now it was necessary to urgently look for answers to other questions. For example, where were the escaped monsters now? Count Abbott assumed that they were unlikely to have evaporated. Sir Arctis knew the answer to this question. According to intelligence, all the monsters were gathered in one place called Ephedor, and the Duke suspected that the monsters had gathered an army against Princess Rudis. Her Highness immediately stood up from her seat and announced that they had to move to Ephedor immediately. His Majesty pondered this for a moment. Ephedor was the largest granary in the entire empire, and if Rudis had won there, she would have gained Ephedor's loyalty. And that was already an invincible force, and the emperor would not have been able to stop her. That could not be allowed. The emperor rose from his seat. He announced that everything should be considered in order to make a balanced decision, and to set out in 2 days. Selena should go too. The Rudis were wary. Father agreed very quickly, although it was not like him. The people of Ephedor would support the princess. Then the emperor would be in a critical situation. Father feared the loss of power more than anything in the world, even more than death. Surely the emperor had some kind of ace up his sleeve, and it was capable of stopping Princess Rudis. It seemed the emperor had an ace up his sleeve, and he was capable of stopping Rudis. It was connected with Lady Ivana. She served Princess Selene faithfully, and she understood that her mistress' influence was falling with the growing popularity of Rudis. The lady reported that her assistant believed the rumors from the temple, but there was no need to worry. After all, there is a second ancient deity. Of course, the lady knew that Selena had failed to subdue him. However, it was possible to try to convince the summoned god. And Lady Ivana did not come empty-handed. The emperor then realized that Lady Ivana knew how to control the ancient deity. That's why he was smiling so meanly now. Rudis understood that the trip to Ephedor could not be cancelled, even if her father had a cunning plan against his daughter. The emperor nodded his head. But then he remembered how Madame had confirmed that the rumors about the first deity's inferiority were true. And he had one weakness. In order to use the power, the summoned deity needed the personal order of Princess Rudis. Without this condition, the power would not activate. Sir Seraphis volunteered to escort the princess to the duchy after the meeting was over. However, Selena called out to her sister. She wanted to talk. The conversation was about his father. When Kelster had failed to be summoned last time, the emperor had raised his hand against Selene. And yesterday, something worse had happened. Sister suggested to talk over a cup of tea. Selena told that yesterday father was very angry with her. He scolded her for not being able to subdue the ancient deity. At one point, his rage reached its limit, and he threw a heavy vase at his daughter. It just missed the girl. But the beauty was very scared. Father ordered to get the power of Lord Kelster by any means, and the princess did not know how to achieve this and what to do next. It seemed that now the father began to hate his previously beloved daughter. The princesses had changed places, and Selena felt in full what was everyday life for Rudis. Then, Rudis suggested that her sister leave the imperial palace. All that was needed was a notarized permission from the temple and the consent of the Duke of Arctis. But for Selene, this was impossible. The girl had neither a supreme deity nor power. All she had was given to her by the imperial family. Rudis tried to console her sister, but her head began to spin. Her consciousness slowly drifted away. Selena's voice became more and more muffled, and the princess fell unconscious to the floor. The sister stood over the lying Rudis and smiled bitterly. She had no other choice but to agree to such a vile act. This was the reason why the emperor agreed to Rudis's terms so easily. When she asked her parent to go to Ephedor to fight the monsters,